Hi everybody. Tonight I invite you to embark on a quiet, lingering journey with me, a journey into a city wrapped in silence, shadowed by memory, a place whispered about in half-remembered tales and silent photographs, Chernobyl. The city for the dead. This is not a story of catastrophe nor a chronicle of disaster alone. It is the slow unfolding of a forgotten world, a place once vibrant with life, now adrift in time. We will tread gently through its empty streets, listen to the murmurs of its abandoned halls, and stand beside the faint echoes of those who once called it home. For in this city where nature has claimed its silent dominion, every faded wall and broken window seems to hold its breath, waiting for someone to remember. And so, we begin with the earliest whispers, before the sirens, before the silence. It was a late spring morning in the town of Pripyat, the proud companion of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, nestled in northern Ukraine. The year was 1986, and though the calendar offered no warning, the air hung strangely still, as if nature herself hesitated on the edge of something unseen. The city bustled like any Soviet township, a child of optimism and iron will. Workers in worn uniforms cycled along wide boulevards lined with chestnut trees, their wheels humming softly over cracked concrete. Mothers pushed prams through parks radiant with tulips and daffodils, their faces lit with gentle smiles. Children's laughter chimed in the spring air as they darted between benches and playgrounds. Pripyat was young, barely 16 years since its founding, yet in that short span it had blossomed with a vitality rare in the Soviet sphere. Nearly 50,000 souls called it home, their lives spun around the towering monoliths of the Chernobyl reactors. The city was a showcase, a proud emblem of atomic progress. A place where science met the future, where workers received not just wages but culture, leisure, and a community framed by pride. On that soft April morning, a gentle sun cast pale rays over the shimmering surface of the Pripyat River. The breeze stirred tenderly, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and blooming lilacs. Life moved gently, as it always did, steady, rhythmic, unaware. In a modest apartment on the 7th floor of a workers' complex, a woman named Lyudmila prepared breakfast for her husband, Vasily. He was a firefighter, tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered hands of a man accustomed to gripping iron and hose. He sat at the kitchen table, still in his undershirt, sipping strong, dark tea from a chipped porcelain mug. Lyudmila watched him, tracing the familiar curve of his brow, the set of his jaw, the slight furrow he wore even at rest. In that quiet moment, as the city stirred awake beyond their window, she felt the quiet ache of love, a love woven through 1,000 such mornings, a tapestry of soft rituals and shared silences. Vasily met her gaze and smiled, a slow, knowing smile that spoke of years past in the comfort of each other's company. He reached for her hand across the table, their fingers entwining gently, a wordless conversation beneath the soft hum of the radio. Outside, a group of school children walked past, their backpacks swaying as they chattered in bright voices about the coming May Day festivities. Red banners had already begun to appear across the city, splashes of colour against the pale concrete, bearing slogans of unity, labour, and the glory of the Soviet dream. No one knew, none could know, that this would be the last normal morning Pripyat would ever see. As the clock struck past 8, the air hung calm, the world poised on a threshold unseen by any living soul. The earth remained still. The sky, a pale wash of blue, held no omen. Yet beneath the surface of reactor number 4, within the labyrinthine heart of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, forces beyond human comprehension stirred restlessly. A test was underway, a safety drill, they said. A routine procedure, the kind of event that filled logs and reports, discussed in briefings and filed away into dusty archives. But this time, in this place, the threads of oversight, pressure, and human error wove together in a silent, unseen knot, a knot that would tighten beyond all imagining. In the control room of reactor number 4, a handful of engineers and technicians manned their stations. Their eyes flicked between gauges and monitors, their hands danced over buttons and switches. They spoke in soft voices, the clipped tones of professionals at work, tinged faintly with irritation at the tediousness of the task. None of them foresaw the invisible storm building within the graphite heart of the reactor. None of them grasped how thin the line between power and peril truly was. And outside, Pripyat remained oblivious. Lyudmila kissed Vasily goodbye as he left for his shift. Her eyes followed him as he strode away down the corridor, his boots echoing softly on the linoleum floor. She stood at the doorway a moment longer, a silent farewell lingering in the morning air, then turned back inside. The hours passed gently. Markets opened, children filed into classrooms, workers manned their posts. The carousel in the town square remained still, its painted horses frozen in mid-gallop. The Ferris wheel, never yet ridden, stood silent, waiting for the May-Day crowd that would never come. At 1:23 in the morning, the world changed forever. But for now, in the warm hush of morning, Pripyat slept on. And somewhere in the quiet heart of the city, time seemed to pause, caught in the soft breath before the storm. When the world tilted into shadow, it did so without ceremony. It was the early hour of 1:23 a.m., and Pripyat lay cocooned in sleep, its streets empty under the hush of a star-strewn sky. Apartment blocks stood silent, windows aglow with the soft flicker of forgotten lamps, the faint hum of refrigerators and radios murmuring in the background of a city at rest. Yet only a few kilometers away, in the control room of reactor number 4, an invisible chain of errors had set in motion a force beyond reckoning. A safety test, meant to simulate a power outage, had veered into territory no manual accounted for, no engineer intended. With the push of a button, a cascade of chemical and physical reactions began, silent, swift, inevitable. An unexpected power surge, the silent movement of control rods, pressure mounting within the sealed heart of the reactor. And then, the earth seemed to exhale a single, sharp breath. The explosion tore the night apart with a roar that echoed across the river, through the pine forests, into the very marrow of the city's bones. A geyser of fire and debris erupted skyward, a glowing lance of molten graphite and steel. The reactor's lid, an immense 100-ton slab of iron and concrete, was hurled into the air like a child's discarded toy. From windows across Pripyat, faint ripples of sound stirred the sleeping. Dogs pricked their ears, children turned in their beds, and a soft tremor hummed beneath the souls of countless dreamers. Yet few awoke. In the barracks of Fire Station number 6, a telephone shrilled into the silence. Vasily Ignatenko, barely into his shift, reached for it with the instinctive precision of a man called to duty. The voice on the other end spoke in clipped, urgent tones, words crisp with the weight of command. A fire. At the plant. Immediate response. Vasily dressed quickly, lacing his boots with practiced ease, sliding on his helmet as he joined the others already assembling in the yard. The fire engine, a squat, red-liveried beast, growled softly in the stillness as men climbed aboard with the solemn ritual of habit. No one spoke of danger. No one imagined catastrophe. Lyudmila, stirring in her bed back in their apartment, opened her eyes to the faint echo of sirens wailing into the night. She glanced at the empty space beside her, hand reaching instinctively for warmth already gone. A strange chill traced her spine. She rose slowly, padding barefoot to the window. From their 7th-floor perch, she gazed out toward the distant outline of the plant. In the dark, it seemed a ghostly silhouette, save for a faint ethereal glow rising above it, an unnatural luminescence, soft yet vivid, a silent aurora curling into the pre-dawn sky. She watched, breath shallow, heart quietly twisting in her chest. At the power plant, Vasily and his comrades leapt into a scene no training could have prepared them for. The reactor core lay exposed, molten and seething, spewing fragments of graphite that hissed like vipers on the asphalt. Fires burned along the roof, lapping hungrily at steel girders and concrete walls. None of the men knew what they faced. Vasily charged forward, hose in hand, boots striking the debris-littered ground. His lungs filled with air, tinged with metallic bitterness, a taste sharp and unnatural. He felt the warmth of the blaze against his skin, a fierce, biting heat that singed the hairs on his arms. And yet, they fought. Around him, voices barked commands, water hissed against flames, boots thundered over the trembling ground. The firemen moved with the relentless courage of those sworn to protect, unknowing that they faced not just fire, but a silent, invisible enemy, a storm of radiation, pouring from the breached reactor like a phantom tide. On the rooftops, pieces of graphite glowed faintly, small embers of death lying in plain sight. Vasily picked one up with gloved hands, tossing it aside with a grunt, unaware that in that moment a deadly dose of radiation surged into his body. Within minutes, the first sicknesses began. Men swayed, their skin prickling with a searing heat from within. Faces flushed, eyes reddened, hands trembled. But the duty remained, a bond stronger than fear, stronger even than the instinct to flee. Back in the city, Lyudmila paced the small kitchen, unease gnawing at her heart. She glanced at the clock, 2 a.m., and frowned. The sirens outside had grown louder, more frequent. She opened the window a crack, letting in the cool air tinged with an unfamiliar acrid scent. The city remained asleep, but the air itself seemed to hum, faintly, a strange thrum just beneath the range of hearing. At the plant, the firemen continued their desperate struggle. Some fell where they stood, collapsing to the ground as their bodies betrayed them. Others pressed on, stepping over the fallen, hands blistering, eyes watering. Vasily worked alongside them, his breath coming in shallow gasps, a quiet fire igniting in his chest. A fire with no flame, no smoke, only a creeping, searing pain that wrapped around his heart. And yet, they did not stop. By dawn, the fires around reactor number 4 had been subdued, though the core itself continued to burn with a ferocity unseen by human eyes. Vasily, now stripped of his gear, sat slumped against the side of a fire engine. His skin was pale, beaded with sweat, his eyes staring into a distance only he could see. When his comrades tried to lift him, he groaned softly, a sound torn from somewhere deep inside. They called for transport. The hospital in Pripyat, hospital number 126, prepared to receive the first casualties. Lyudmila would later recall that the first time she saw him after the explosion, Vasily looked almost unchanged. Tired, yes, pale perhaps, but still her Vasily. He smiled at her faintly as they lifted him from the ambulance. It was only later, as the hours stretched into the grey dawn, that the change began. And as the sun rose gently over Pripyat, casting golden light upon a city waking to a day it could never have imagined, a silent, invisible shadow spread its fingers wide. The city, still dreaming, remained unaware that its fate had been sealed in the quiet hours before dawn. And so the morning after the world had changed came with the soft, familiar sounds of life. Footsteps on the pavement, laughter of children, the gentle hum of a radio. The carousel still waited. The Ferris wheel remained silent. And the clock, indifferent, kept ticking on. By morning, the streets of Pripyat shimmered beneath a pale, golden sun. The city stirred with quiet vitality, a mirror of 1,000 other mornings that had come before. Children ran to school, their satchels bouncing against their backs. Mothers queued at bakeries for fresh bread, their chatter weaving through the soft air. Buses rolled gently along broad avenues, ferrying workers toward the plant, the factories, the offices. And yet beneath this familiar rhythm, something unseen had awakened. Invisible particles drifted on the morning breeze, silent, weightless, merciless. They clung to the skin, to the hair, nestled into clothing. They seeped into open windows, settled on playgrounds, dusted the petals of blooming tulips. The scent of spring mingled imperceptibly with the metallic tang of fallout, unnoticed by those breathing it in with every gentle inhalation. At hospital number 126, Lyudmila stood beside Vasily's bed, her heart tightening at the sight before her. In the soft half-light of the hospital room, Vasily seemed distant, his skin pale, lips cracked, eyes sunken beneath dark crescents. His hands, once firm and strong, trembled faintly as they lay atop the thin blanket. Nurses moved quietly around them, their faces set with professional calm, though a certain unease flickered behind their eyes. "Don't worry," Vasily whispered, his voice a thread of sound. "It's nothing. Just smoke from the fire." Lyudmila smiled. A trembling thing meant more for him than for herself. She reached out, threading her fingers through his, ignoring the chill of his skin. In her heart, something stirred, a shadow of fear that refused to speak its name. Around them, other firemen from Vasily's brigade occupied nearby beds. Some moaned softly, others lay eerily still, their breaths shallow, skin flushed or mottled with strange, angry patches. The doctors worked in hurried silence, moving between the beds, exchanging quiet, urgent whispers. By mid-morning, the hospital halls filled with relatives, wives, mothers, brothers. The air thickened with the scent of iodine, disinfectant, and something else, something faintly metallic, the kind of smell that settled on the back of the tongue and refused to leave. Lyudmila stayed at Vasily's side, her hand in his, long after visiting hours ended. The nurses, seeing her silent vigil, did not ask her to leave. Outside, Pripyat remained blissfully unaware. At the schools, lessons continued. Children recited poems, solved arithmetic, played hopscotch in sunlit courtyards. A faint drizzle of dust, a mixture of graphite, cesium, strontium, settled softly upon their hair and skin, as harmless seeming as morning dew. In the markets, people bartered over vegetables, queued for milk, laughed beneath banners proclaiming the glory of labour. The sky stretched overhead in a pale, unwavering blue, betraying no sign of the silent storm unfurling around them. At the plant, a different scene played out. Men in heavy protective suits, brought in hastily from distant cities, began to arrive, their faces obscured by thick masks and dark visors. They moved with deliberate caution through the devastated remains of reactor number 4, stepping over twisted steel and smouldering debris. In hurried, tense voices, officials spoke of containment, of minimizing panic, of restoring control. Orders snapped across telephones, between radio bursts, across hastily assembled command centers. Yet even as plans were drawn and actions taken, the truth loomed, unspoken, inescapable. The reactor burned on. A seething core of uranium fuel, superheated and molten, continued to smolder beneath the wreckage. A plume of invisible death billowed steadily into the sky, carried by the shifting winds, spreading across the countryside in silent, widening arcs. By afternoon, helicopters buzzed low over the reactor site, dumping sand, clay, boron, desperate measures aimed at a force no one fully understood. Pilots flew again and again, dousing the inferno below, unaware that each pass brought them closer to the invisible line of fatal exposure. In the heart of Pripyat, life continued, though faint ripples of unease began to stir. Some noticed the strange metallic taste lingering in their mouths. Others felt an odd burning in the throat, a peculiar itching of the skin. But explanations came easily. Spring allergies, a touch of flu, the dry air of the season. The authorities said nothing. At noon, children played along the banks of the Pripyat River. A soft wind stirred their hair, ruffled the surface of the water, carried flecks of radioactive dust in a dance unseen by human eyes. They laughed, splashed, called out to one another beneath a sky that glowed softly with a deceptive calm. In the late afternoon, Lyudmila sat once more beside Vasily, now resting in a darkened hospital room. His fever had climbed, his skin burned with an internal heat no water could quench. He spoke less now, his words coming in faint murmurs, half coherent, broken by shallow breaths. When she placed a damp cloth upon his brow, his skin sizzled faintly beneath her touch. She did not flinch. Outside the hospital, small clusters of people had begun to gather, wives of firemen, relatives of plant workers, neighbors whispering with furrowed brows. Questions hung in the air, half-formed, chasing rumors that twisted and flickered like smoke. In apartments across the city, mothers noticed their children's flushed cheeks, the strange redness of their eyes. Some called doctors. Others brushed it off, waiting for answers that never came. By evening, the first rumors of evacuation began to stir. Quiet words passed between neighbors, whispers shared in hushed tones on stairwells and courtyards. A military bus seen idling by the square. Officials moving briskly between buildings. The faint, growing presence of uniformed men with stern expressions and unreadable eyes. But still, no announcement came. At sunset, the Ferris wheel in the amusement park caught the last rays of light, its metal frame gleaming softly, waiting in eternal anticipation of a crowd that would never come. The shadows lengthened, stretching along empty streets, across silent playgrounds dusted with unseen ash. And in hospital number 126, Lyudmila leaned close to Vasily, her lips near his ear, whispering words of comfort, love, hope. Beyond the walls, the city held its breath, perched unknowingly on the edge of the abyss. The night descended once more upon Pripyat, a night that would become its last. Night fell upon Pripyat with a velvet softness, its quiet streets bathed in the silver hush of moonlight. Apartment windows glowed faintly, the hum of evening life carrying on behind thin curtains and softly closing doors. The day's rumors lingered in whispered conversations, snatches of worry exchanged between neighbors, hushed tones on staircases, questions that floated unanswered through the cool evening air. Yet, for many, life carried forward with the stubborn weight of routine. Supper was served. Children were tucked into bed. Radios played soft ballads and evening news that spoke nothing of what had happened, nothing of the creeping shadow encircling the city. At hospital number 126, The corridors echoed with subdued footsteps, the shuffle of nurses moving between rooms, their faces etched with quiet dread beneath the thin veneer of composure. Lyudmila remained at Vasily's bedside, her fingers laced around his unmoving hand. His skin, now pale as wax, felt brittle beneath her touch, the faint sheen of sweat cooling in the sterile air. He drifted in and out of a restless sleep, whispering fragments of words she could scarcely understand, childhood memories, names of fellow firemen, half-finished sentences that melted into soft groans. Doctors passed through in silent pairs, checking vitals, adjusting drips, their faces giving nothing away. Yet their glances, quick and grave, betrayed a knowledge too heavy for words. They knew. They had seen this before, in medical journals, in hushed conversations at the periphery of classified briefings. They had seen the unspeakable in photographs from distant tests in remote lands. Radiation sickness, acute, irreversible. But they said nothing, could say nothing. Lyudmila leaned closer, her breath a soft tremble against Vasily's ear. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here." He stirred faintly, his lips forming the ghost of a smile before falling back into the hollow cradle of fevered sleep. Outside the hospital, the streets grew eerily still. Military trucks rumbled softly along the avenues, dark shapes sliding like shadows beneath the muted streetlights. Soldiers disembarked in silence, moving in small groups, their boots crunching softly on the pavement. They carried no weapons, no banners, only the heavy, silent burden of orders given in quiet urgency. They moved to government buildings, to administrative centers, to the gathering points quietly marked on hastily drawn maps. Pripyat, the city built on promise, the city of youth and future, stood on the edge of an evacuation it did not yet know was coming. In their homes, families began to sense the tremors beneath the surface. Ivan Petrov, a schoolteacher, noticed the strange scent clinging to his children's clothes when they returned from playing by the river. A sharp, acrid tang he could not name. He tried to wash it away, scrubbing hands and faces with soap and water, but the smell lingered faintly in the air, like the ghost of something burnt. Valentina Kuznetsova, a mother of 3, woke in the night to the sound of her youngest coughing, a dry, persistent rasp that seemed out of place in the soft spring air. She soothed the child back to sleep, pressing her lips against a forehead hotter than it should have been. And in the heart of the city, near the park, an old man named Pavel stood on his balcony, staring toward the distant glow that hovered faintly on the horizon. The glow from reactor number 4, still smouldering, still bleeding its invisible poison into the night. Pavel remembered another war, another evacuation, another time when the world changed overnight. His bones, worn by years and sorrow, recognized the quiet tremor of fate shifting beneath his feet. He stood in the dark for a long while, listening to the soft murmur of the wind, carrying with it the faint, metallic whisper of a city standing unknowingly on the brink. Back in the hospital, Lyudmila watched over Vasily as the night deepened. His breathing had grown shallow, the rise and fall of his chest a fragile rhythm. His lips moved without sound, fragments of dreams caught in the fevered web of his mind. She pressed a cool cloth to his brow, her own body aching with exhaustion, heart heavy with fear she dared not name. In the quiet hours before dawn, a nurse approached her, a young woman with kind eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. She knelt beside Lyudmila, speaking in a voice soft as falling leaves. "You should rest, even for a little while." But Lyudmila shook her head. "I can't leave him." The nurse nodded, offering a thin, understanding smile before placing a gentle hand on Lyudmila's shoulder. She stayed a moment, silent, then rose and slipped away into the shadowed hall. Outside, the city slept in the hush before the storm. It was just before 4 in the morning when the first loudspeakers crackled to life. Across Pripyat, in every district, on every street corner, the calm, practiced voice of a city official broke through the silence. The message was clear, precise, carefully maculationed. An evacuation. A precaution. Nothing more. Residents were advised to gather their essentials, documents, some food, personal belongings, and make their way to designated assembly points. They would be leaving for only a few days. Everything would be fine. Lyudmila heard the announcement through the thin walls of the hospital. She stood, gripping Vasily's hand tightly, her heart pounding in a rhythm that drowned out the words. Around the city, lights flickered on in windows. People stepped onto balconies, into hallways, into streets. They gathered in hushed clusters, faces drawn with confusion, some with fear, many with disbelief. Children clutched dolls and stuffed animals. Mothers packed hurriedly, stuffing bags with whatever came to hand. Fathers spoke in low voices, reading the official notices, clinging to the fragile hope that this was indeed only temporary. The city began to move, not with panic, but with a slow, heavy reluctance. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale light upon the hushed exodus, Pripyat's heart beat with the slow, silent thrum of a farewell it did not yet know it was making. And in the hospital, Lyudmila sat beside Vasily, their hands entwined beneath the fading stars, while beyond the walls, a city prepared to vanish from the world. The dawn that rose over Pripyat was a fragile, delicate thing, a pale wash of colour that painted the eastern sky in soft hues of rose and gold. It crept gently over the rooftops and across the silent avenues, brushing against the faces of a people roused not by choice, but by decree. Everywhere the city stirred with an uneasy rhythm. Along Lenin Boulevard, long lines of people formed in quiet procession. They stood with their belongings gathered hastily. Small bags, coats folded over arms, the occasional wicker basket filled with bread, documents, and a scattering of personal treasures. Children clung to mothers' hands, their eyes wide with questions no one dared to answer. The buses arrived in measured convoys, green military transports with broad, expressionless faces. Soldiers stood beside them, giving instructions in calm, practiced voices, their words falling like gentle rain upon the crowd. You will be back in 3 days. Bring only what you need. Everything will be waiting when you return. The people nodded, swallowing doubt, clutching their meagre bundles close. The faces in the crowd bore the weary hope of those who wished to believe, even as something deep within whispered that this departure carried the weight of permanence. At the edge of the square, Pavel watched in silence. His old hands rested atop the worn handle of a cane, his sharp eyes tracing the slow, somber dance of the Exodus. He had seen such lines before, in another time, under a different sky, when faces wore the same thin veil of composure, masking fear with the brittle shell of hope. He leaned upon his cane, the wood worn smooth beneath his fingers, and murmured softly to no one. No one ever comes back the same. The wind carried his words away. In the heart of the city, the loudspeakers repeated their steady refrain, a mantra meant to soothe. This is a temporary measure, a matter of safety. The city will be secured. You will return soon. But beneath the measured cadence, a different sound had begun to rise. The sound of absence. Doors closed softly behind leaving families. Keys were turned gently in locks that would never again be opened by their owners. Curtains swayed in open windows, billowing faintly in the morning breeze. A bicycle, forgotten in a hurry, lay abandoned on a front step, its wheels turning slowly in the wind. Pripyat, a city born of promise, began its quiet transformation into a city of ghosts. At hospital number 126, Lyudmila stood in the doorway of Vasily's room, watching as a pair of nurses adjusted his IV drip. The pale light from the corridor spilled onto his face, now thin and waxen, his breath a soft rasp in the still air. One of the nurses turned toward her, her voice low, apologetic. You should go. The buses are leaving soon. Lyudmila shook her head. Her voice came out as a whisper, edged with something fierce and quiet. I'm not leaving him. The nurse opened her mouth to speak, but something in Lyudmila's eyes silenced her. With a soft nod, she returned to her work, her movements slow, deliberate, almost reverent. Lyudmila stepped inside, drawing a chair close to Vasily's bedside. She took his hand, wrapping her fingers gently around his. His skin felt thin as paper, the faint pulse beneath a fragile thread barely holding on. She bent low, her voice a tender murmur. I'll stay with you, until the end. In the corridors beyond, the hospital staff moved with quiet urgency. Beds were being emptied, patients, those well enough to travel, were escorted awaiting transports. But in this small room, time seemed to slow, held within the hush of a love that refused to yield. Vasily stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering open for a heartbeat. His gaze met hers, clouded, distant, yet filled with something deeper than pain. A single word passed his lips, soft as the breath of dawn. Lyuda. She leaned closer, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. I'm here. His lips curved in a faint smile, a fragile ghost of the smile she knew, and then his eyes slipped closed once more, drawn back into the shadowed depths of fevered sleep. Lyudmila pressed her forehead gently against his hand, holding it there, feeling the faint warmth of life beneath her skin. Outside, the buses filled slowly, the people boarding in silence, their eyes darting toward familiar windows, favorite trees, the places they called home. Neighbors exchanged quiet farewells, brief nods, soft touches upon the shoulder, murmured promises to meet again in a few days. Mothers lifted children into waiting arms. Fathers hoisted bags onto their shoulders. Old men folded their hands behind their backs and stared into the distance with eyes that saw beyond the horizon. The soldiers offered polite, practiced reassurances, their words falling softly into the growing hush of the exodus. One by one, the buses began to pull away from the curbs. Their engines rumbled low, tires rolling slowly over the cracked concrete of streets that had once echoed with laughter, music, the hum of daily life. The people inside stared out through the smudged glass, watching as the familiar landscape slipped gently away. The schools, the parks, the Ferris wheel, forever still, the apartments with laundry still drying on the balconies, the market stalls with their colourful awnings flapping softly in the morning breeze. A city folding itself into silence, frame by frame, as the last of its people departed. By midday, the streets of Pripyat stood empty. Only the whisper of the wind moved through the avenues, rustling leaves, setting an abandoned swing creaking gently in a forgotten playground. The great city, born of vision and pride, now stood hollow beneath the soft gaze of the sun, a shell waiting to be reclaimed by shadows. At the hospital, Lyudmila remained beside Vasily, her hand never leaving his. She did not hear the last buses leave, nor the faint hum of helicopters passing overhead. She heard only the quiet rhythm of his breath, the soft murmur of her own heart, and the weight of a love that would not, could not, be left behind. And beyond the hospital walls, the city waited in silence, holding its breath beneath the soft falling ash of a disaster that had only just begun. Afternoon draped itself across the empty streets of Pripyat with a solemn, weightless calm. The sun hung pale in the sky, veiled by a thin mist that shimmered faintly, a sheen no eye could discern for what it truly was. Invisible particles drifted softly down, settling on benches where no one would sit again, coating the glass of storefronts where no customers would enter, dusting the cobblestones of the squares where laughter had once echoed. The city was silent. The buses had rolled away, their long procession disappearing down the road toward Kiev, carrying with them the lives, dreams, and fragile belongings of 50,000 souls. Only the soft hush of the wind remained, a wind that carried with it the unseen breath of the reactor's heart. In the heart of Pripyat, Hospital number 126 stood like a sentinel in a land abandoned by time. Its windows reflected the empty streets beyond, its doors opened occasionally to let a shadow pass. A doctor, a nurse, a soldier tasked with duties they would never speak of again. In room 17 on the second floor, Lyudmila sat alone with Vasily. She had not moved from his side, save to fetch water or answer a quiet request from the nurses. Her world had narrowed to the soft creak of the chair beneath her, the slow rhythm of Vasily's breathing, the faint murmur of monitors humming softly in the background. Vasily lay still, his face pale and drawn, skin marked with strange sallow patches that no doctor dared explain. His lips parted slightly, breath shallow, eyes flickering beneath half-closed lids as if caught in a dream beyond reach. Lyudmila reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer, aching tenderness of love stretched thin across a chasm no words could bridge. The nurses came and went, moving like wraiths in the half-light of the ward. They changed the drips, adjusted blankets, whispered soft words meant more for themselves than for the patients who lay in that quiet hall of fading life. None asked Lyudmila to leave. Beyond the hospital, the soldiers moved with methodical precision. They walked the length of the streets, checking doors, placing quiet marks upon walls, symbols known only to those tasked with the grim duty of securing a city abandoned overnight. In the parks, dogs wandered in slow, bewildered circles, their eyes scanning the streets for masters who would never return. Cats prowled along fences, silent shadows moving through a world suddenly emptied of its people. The air itself seemed to hum, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that threaded through the empty spaces, settling into the marrow of the earth. In an apartment on Kurchatov Street, a dining table stood set for a meal never eaten. A pot of soup cooled on the stove. A clock ticked gently on the wall, counting the silent seconds in a home where time itself had stopped. In the amusement park, the Ferris wheel cast long shadows upon the cracked pavement. It stood unmoving, a frozen sentinel over a playground void of laughter. A pair of stuffed animals, prizes from a game booth never opened, swayed gently in the breeze, their colours fading beneath a fine dust of silent ash. And in the heart of the hospital, Lyudmila whispered softly into the quiet. "Do you remember, Vasya," she said, her voice barely a breath, "that morning by the river? When you brought me those wildflowers, you said they were nothing special, just weeds. But I kept them. I pressed them in a book. I still have them." Vasily stirred faintly, a soft sigh escaping his lips, a sound so light it might have been the echo of memory itself. Lyudmila smiled, a fragile trembling thing that bloomed through the veil of tears. She leaned closer, her forehead resting gently against the back of his hand. I wish I could have given you everything, Vasya. A bigger home, a family, a life beyond this." The words hung in the air, dissolving into the soft hum of the monitors. A nurse entered quietly, carrying a small metal tray. She checked the drip, her gloved hands moving with careful precision. Her eyes met Lyudmila's for a brief moment, a flicker of understanding passing between two women bound by silent grief. "He's sleeping," the nurse whispered. "You should try to rest." But Lyudmila only shook her head gently. "I'll stay." The nurse nodded, her expression softening into something close to reverence. She placed a hand briefly on Lyudmila's shoulder before slipping away into the quiet corridors beyond. As evening crept slowly over the horizon, a soft rain began to fall. It came without thunder, without fanfare, a gentle drizzle that washed over the rooftops and streets, running in thin rivulets along the curbs, pooling softly at the edges of forgotten sidewalks. But this was no ordinary rain. Invisible to the eye, it carried within it the fine, deadly traces of cesium, iodine, strontium, particles drawn from the broken heart of reactor number 4, mingling with the water that fell softly upon the empty city. It washed over the playgrounds, the open windows, the gardens that once bloomed with tulips and lilacs, and it soaked gently into the silent ground, as if burying beneath it the whispers of a city undone. Inside the hospital, Lyudmila sat motionless, her hand entwined with Vasily's, her eyes half closed in a waking dream of memories half forgotten and moments forever lost. She thought of their first dance beneath paper lanterns in a summer square, of the sound of his laughter, rich and warm, echoing through their tiny apartment on quiet Sunday mornings, of the way his arms had wrapped around her in the stillness of countless nights, strong and certain, the harbour where her heart found its peace. She closed her eyes, the faint smile lingering on her lips. "I'm here, Vasya," she whispered once more. "I'll be right here, until the end." And as the rain fell softly over the empty streets of Pripyat, the city exhaled a long, silent breath, a breath of farewell, of endings, of a world passing quietly into the realm of memory. The night descended slowly, folding its dark arms around the city of the dead, while within the quiet hush of a hospital room, love held its vigil in the shadow of the storm. Night settled over Pripyat like a velvet shroud, soft, silent, inescapable. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a fine sheen upon the empty streets, a glimmer that caught the reflection of dim streetlights still burning faithfully for a city that no longer stirred. The wind moved quietly through the avenues, brushing against walls, whispering through open windows, threading between playground swings that swayed gently in the emptiness. Inside hospital number 126, the hush deepened. The corridors, once alive with hurried footsteps and whispered conversations, now lay in near complete silence. The evacuation had thinned even the ranks of medical staff, leaving only a handful of nurses, a few weary doctors, and the shadows of a duty none had been prepared to bear. In room 17, Lyudmila remained. She sat unmoving by Vasily's side, her hand wrapped gently around his. His skin felt cooler now, the faint warmth of life flickering dimly beneath her fingertips. His breathing came in shallow sighs, a fragile thread tying him to a world that seemed to fade with each passing hour. She had ceased speaking aloud, her words falling instead into the quiet sanctuary of her heart, where they mingled with memories too precious to utter. She thought of his voice, how it would rise with soft laughter when she teased him over his clumsy dancing. She thought of his touch, the way his hands had always held hers with a strength that spoke not of power, but of quiet devotion. She thought of the countless mornings they had shared, the way the sun would catch in his hair as he buttoned his uniform, the soft kiss upon her brow before he left for his shift. These moments wove themselves gently around her heart, a tapestry of love that stood unbroken, even as the world unraveled beyond the hospital walls. The nurses moved softly in the hallway, their footsteps hushed against the worn linoleum. Occasionally one would glance into the room, her gaze lingering upon the silent vigil kept by the woman who refused to leave. They said nothing. They had long since ceased trying to persuade her. Outside, the rainwater pooled in shallow puddles, reflecting the faint shimmer of the reactor's distant glow, a soft, ominous light that pulsed faintly upon the horizon, a silent reminder of the storm that still burned at the edge of the world. In the parks, the swings swayed gently in the night breeze. The empty carousel turned slightly on its axis, moved by the wind alone. And Pripyat dreamed in the soft, endless slumber of a city abandoned, its heartbeat silenced, its future stolen in a single, unseen breath. Within the hospital, time lost its shape. Minutes slipped into hours, hours blurred into the deep hush of night. Lyudmila rested her head against Vasily's arm, her eyes half closed in a waking dream of memory and sorrow. The steady hum of the monitor beside his bed droned softly, a sound she had come to know like the echo of her own heartbeat. At some point, though she could not later say when, the door opened with a soft creak. A doctor entered, his white coat stained with the smudges of long hours, his eyes shadowed by something far heavier than fatigue. He approached with quiet steps, pausing at the foot of Vasily's bed. He glanced at Lyudmila, his voice soft as falling ash. "You should rest." She shook her head slowly, her fingers tightening slightly around Vasily's hand. The doctor nodded once, a silent gesture of understanding. He placed a gentle hand upon Vasily's wrist, feeling for the faint thread of life that pulsed beneath the skin. His brow furrowed slightly, lips pressed into a thin, solemn line. For a long moment, he remained there, listening, watching, measuring the silent passage of time within the fragile body of a man who had faced a fire no human could have withstood. Then, softly, he exhaled, a breath that seemed to carry within it the weight of 1,000 untold sorrows. He met Lyudmila's gaze once more, his eyes reflecting a truth too profound for words. She nodded, understanding, before he spoke. The doctor placed a hand upon her shoulder, a gesture of silent respect, then turned and left, his footsteps fading into the quiet corridor beyond. Lyudmila sat in silence, her heart a storm of love, grief, and quiet, fierce devotion. The night deepened. The shadows grew long. The hush of the city wrapped itself gently around the hospital walls, and Vasily remained, his breath a soft whisper in the hush, his life flickering like the last ember of a fading fire. Lyudmila leaned close, her lips brushing against his ear. "I'm here, Vasya," she whispered. "I will always be here." She closed her eyes, letting the silence enfold her, a silence filled not with emptiness, but with the echo of a love that would outlast even the darkest night. Outside, the city lay in quiet repose beneath the falling ash of a disaster unseen, unknown, yet destined to be remembered across the turning of the years. Pripyat slept, its streets washed in a silver hush, its heart beating faintly beneath the layers of dust and memory. And in a small hospital room, as the first light of dawn traced the horizon with a fragile gleam, love held its vigil, a quiet defiance against the dark, a whispered promise beneath a sky heavy with the weight of a world undone. The dawn that followed was a ghost of light, pale and uncertain, creeping over the horizon with a hesitant grace. Pripyat lay beneath it in a hush so profound it seemed almost sacred. A city paused in time, abandoned by the living yet not yet claimed by death. Mist coiled gently along the streets, soft tendrils weaving between the silent apartment blocks and the leafless trees that lined the boulevards. The windows stared blankly outward, hollow eyes in concrete faces. Curtains fluttered in the breeze from open windows, left ajar in the frantic departure. A single tricycle lay toppled in the courtyard of kindergarten number 3, its bright red frame dulled by the fine layer of settling dust. The air was cool, tinged faintly with the damp scent of rain mingled with something sharper, a metallic undertone, imperceptible but present, threading its way through the deserted city like a silent herald of what had passed. Inside hospital number 126, Lyudmila sat unmoving. The first rays of dawn brushed across the whitewashed walls, casting long shadows that stretched toward the floor where her chair remained anchored beside Vasily's bed. She had not slept. She had not stirred. Her hand remained wrapped around his, the slender thread of contact, the only anchor that kept her drifting heart tethered to the fragile present. His skin had grown cooler, the faint pulse beneath her fingertips slowing with the silent inevitability that neither love nor courage could halt. The monitors beside the bed hummed quietly, a soft rhythmic sound that seemed almost too loud in the hush of the morning. Each beep, each measured breath of machinery was a countdown not to an end, but to a farewell written across the stars long before this moment. The nurses moved in careful, reverent silence. They entered with soft steps, checking the drip, adjusting a blanket, pausing to cast brief, compassionate glances toward the woman who would not leave. None spoke. None asked her to go. They understood in a way words could never express. Lyudmila leaned closer, resting her forehead lightly against the back of Vasily's hand. A memory drifted unbidden into her mind, a soft summer evening long ago when they had sat by the riverbank watching the sun sink beneath the horizon. Vasily had drawn her close, his arm a quiet fortress around her shoulders, his voice low as he spoke of dreams that seemed endless then. They had laughed at nothing, shared stories of a future they believed was theirs to shape. In that moment she had thought they would have forever, and now she swallowed softly, her lips parting in a whisper meant for no ears but his. "I love you." A breath, a pause. The monitor beside the bed flickered. The soft rhythmic hum faltered, a faint stutter in its endless song. Lyudmila's heart clenched, her fingers tightening gently around his hand. She leaned in, her lips brushing his temple, her eyes closing against the rising tide within her. "I love you, Vasya. Always." Another flicker, another pause. The nurse who stood quietly at the door lowered her gaze, folding her hands softly in front of her, a silent sentinel of a sacred moment. And then, the monitor's hum faded into a long, unbroken note. A sound that filled the small room with a weight beyond grief, beyond time. Lyudmila did not cry out. She did not move. She sat there, her hands still wrapped around his, her heart wrapped around a memory that would never fade. A nurse stepped forward, her movements gentle as falling snow. With hands soft and reverent, she reached for the monitor, silencing it with a touch. The room returned to silence, a silence so deep it seemed to hold its own breath. Lyudmila pressed her lips once more to Vasily's hand, her tears falling in silent, glimmering trails upon his skin. She whispered into the hush, "You'll always be mine, always." And though the heart she held had stilled, though the breath she longed for would never return, the love between them remained, a flame unextinguished, burning softly in the quiet places where even death could not reach. The nurse placed a gentle hand upon Lyudmila's shoulder. No words passed between them. None were needed. Outside, the city remained as it had been, silent, empty, waiting. The dawn broke fully now, casting its pale light over a world forever changed. Helicopters thudded low in the sky beyond the horizon, their shadows moving like distant phantoms across the abandoned fields and forests. Soldiers in protective gear patrolled the silent streets, their faces hidden behind heavy masks, their footsteps muffled by the weight of a mission none of them had ever imagined. The reactor still smouldered, its heart a wound upon the earth, bleeding invisible death into the sky. And Pripyat remained, a city emptied of its people, its soul lingering in the echoes of footsteps no longer heard, laughter no longer shared, lives no longer lived. In the quiet heart of this forsaken place, a woman sat beside the man she loved, her silent vigil, a defiant whisper against the storm that had taken everything but the one thing it could never claim: love. The sun rose higher, its light spilling across the hushed streets, painting golden patterns upon the walls of a city already slipping into legend. And in a small hospital room where love had held its vigil through the darkest night, a quiet farewell echoed softly into the morning. carried upon a silence deeper than words. A silence that would linger long after the world had forgotten the names written in its shadow. The morning unfolded with a slow, heavy grace, a quiet awakening not of life but of a city adjusting to its new existence in silence. Pripyat remained untouched by the usual stirrings of a day begun. No laughter echoed down its avenues, no footsteps marked its squares. The windows of its homes stared out upon empty streets, their glass reflecting the pale, indifferent sky. And over it all, a thin veil of dust hung in the air, unseen, unfelt by the senses, but there all the same. The silent residue of disaster settling gently upon the bones of a city abandoned overnight. At hospital number 126, the routine of duty continued, wrapped in the hush of mourning that touched every corner of its worn corridors. Nurses moved softly between rooms now half empty, their faces drawn with a quiet sorrow that words could never express. They carried trays, checked charts, whispered gentle words to those who remained, though their hearts bore the weight of knowing it would not be for long. In room 17, Lyudmila sat unmoving. Vasily's hand lay clasped in hers, cool beneath her touch, the faint warmth of life now gone. His face was calm, more so than it had been in the long hours of his suffering. There was no pain now, only a peaceful stillness that felt almost foreign after the endless tension of the past days. Lyudmila traced her thumb gently across his knuckles, her breath a soft whisper against the hush. The world outside might have moved on, soldiers, scientists, officials, but within this small room, time stood still. She thought of the vows they had exchanged years before, spoken in the soft glow of a summer morning beneath a canopy of lilacs, words of love, of faith, of forever. And though forever had come sooner than either had imagined, she felt in her heart that it had not been broken. Because love, she realized, was not measured in years, nor marked by the turning of seasons. It lived in the quiet moments, in the held hands, in the whispered promises made not to the world but to the heart alone. She leaned forward, pressing her lips softly to Vasily's forehead, a kiss of farewell, of gratitude, of undying love. The door opened gently. A nurse entered, her eyes kind, though shadowed by a fatigue that spoke of more than sleepless nights. "It's time," she whispered. Lyudmila nodded slowly, her hand tightening once around Vasily's before she carefully placed it atop his chest. She stood, her legs trembling slightly beneath her, yet carrying her with a strength drawn from somewhere deep within. The nurse approached, her hands gentle as she began the solemn task of preparing Vasily for his final rest. Her movements were reverent, precise, an unspoken acknowledgement of the man who had given everything in a fire no human could have withstood. Lyudmila stepped back, watching in silence. Her heart ached with a hollow that felt almost too vast to hold, yet within that ache burned a quiet, steady flame, a love that even death could not extinguish. When the nurse finished, she turned to Lyudmila and gave a small, respectful nod. "There is a place, outside the city," the nurse said softly, "a burial ground. They are taking the others there." Lyudmila met her gaze, her voice a thread of sound. "I know." The nurse hesitated, then reached out, placing a gentle hand upon Lyudmila's arm. "You should go. You can't stay here." For a long moment, Lyudmila said nothing. Then, with a soft breath, she nodded. The nurse stepped aside, allowing her a final moment. Lyudmila turned back to Vasily, her heart whispering words too sacred for sound. She bent once more, her lips brushing his hand in a kiss as soft as falling ash. "I'll carry you with me," she whispered, "always." And with that, she straightened, her heart heavy yet filled with a quiet strength, and walked slowly from the room. The corridors of the hospital were hushed as she passed, the few nurses she met offering silent, knowing glances. She stepped outside into the morning light. The air felt different, cooler, thinner somehow, though it held no breeze. The streets stretched out before her, empty, vast, silent. The familiar sights of her city now bore the strange stillness of a world abandoned. A playground left in haste, a bicycle leaning against a fence, laundry hanging limp on a line swaying softly in the wind. She walked alone, each step a soft echo upon the silent pavement. Along the avenue, soldiers moved with quiet efficiency, their faces hidden behind masks, their voices low as they spoke in clipped, precise tones. They barely glanced at her as she passed, a woman among the remnants of a world they had been tasked to contain. At the edge of the city, near the checkpoint where the last of the evacuation buses had once stood, A soldier stopped her gently with a raised hand. "You should be on transport," he said, his voice muffled beneath his mask. "It's not safe here." Lyudmila met his gaze, her eyes calm, steady. "I'm leaving now." He hesitated, then nodded once, stepping aside. She walked on, her heart carrying the weight of a love that could never be left behind. As she passed the edge of Pripyat, she paused once, looking back over her shoulder. The city stretched out behind her, silent, still, waiting. The Ferris wheel gleamed faintly in the morning light, its frame catching the sun's soft rays. The avenues stood empty, the playgrounds deserted, the windows staring back like the eyes of a soul quietly waiting to be remembered. Lyudmila stood for a long moment, letting the image settle deep within her heart. A farewell to a home, to a life, to a love she would carry within her for all the years to come. Then, with a soft breath that trembled like a whisper on the wind, she turned and walked away. And Pripyat remained, its streets wrapped in silence, its stories whispered only by the wind, its heart still beating in the quiet echoes of those who had loved, who had lived, and who would never truly be gone. In the 10th night of this slow descent into the silent corridors of a forsaken city, the story unfolded deeper into the heart of Chernobyl, a heart that still beat faintly beneath layers of dust, decay, and forgotten whispers. The sun had long since yielded its dominion to the shroud of a sky ever veiled in gentle ash-grey. Anya found herself walking the roads that wound like brittle veins through the skeletal remains of the city. Every footstep fell with a hush upon the cracked concrete, as if even the earth feared to awaken the slumbering past. Past rows of identical apartment blocks, their hollow windows stared out like the empty sockets of skulls. The walls, once vibrant with the laughter of families, now whispered with the soft sigh of wind weaving through broken panes. Curtains, left behind like the tattered remnants of forgotten lives, fluttered softly in the breeze, echoing a silent farewell no one remained to hear. Anya's hand trailed along a low concrete fence as she approached what had once been a school. The words Srednya Shkola Номер 3 were faint upon the archway, nearly worn away by seasons of rain and time's indifferent hand. She pushed the door, and it creaked open, not with resistance but with an eerie ease, as though the building itself invited her to step inside its hollow chambers. The scent of damp paper and rust filled the air, mingling with the faint undertone of mould. Desks stood in uneven rows, some overturned as though the students had fled in the middle of a lesson. Upon one desk lay a small, faded notebook, its pages curling at the edges. Anya brushed away a veil of dust and opened it. Childlike handwriting danced across the yellowed paper, mathematical exercises, a doodle of a flower, and on the final page, a sentence scrawled in uncertain lines. "We are leaving." She closed the book softly, her fingers lingering upon its cover. This silent testimony of a child's confusion and fear held a weight that settled gently in her heart. How many dreams had been folded away, like paper cranes left to drift in the wind? How many names now scattered like whispers in the ruins? The echoes of hurried footsteps seemed to tremble faintly within the walls. Anya remained still, her breathing shallow. It was not fear that held her, but a somber reverence, a silent understanding that these halls belonged to memories, and she was but a fleeting guest. Her gaze fell upon a mural at the far end of the corridor, a vibrant painting of a sun rising over a field of golden wheat. The colours, though faded, retained a quiet brightness, a symbol of hope painted by hands that believed in a dawn never meant to come. She touched the cool plaster lightly, feeling its rough texture beneath her fingertips. Exiting the school, she wandered toward a playground rusting beneath the overgrowth. The swings moved softly, stirred by a breath of wind, their chains sighing in the stillness. A carousel stood half-sunken into the earth, its bright colours now dulled to the hues of memory. Anya sat upon a swing, letting her feet sway gently, the creak of the chains a lullaby in the silent evening. The world felt suspended in a quiet that was not absence, but a form of waiting. As though the city, abandoned by life, still cradled the weight of unseen stories. And in this suspended breath of time, Anya listened, not with ears, but with the quiet spaces of her heart. She wandered on as twilight painted the horizon in muted strokes of violet and grey. A soft drizzle began to fall, its gentle patter a hushed companion. The rain seemed to wash the city in a veil of delicate remembrance. each drop tracing lines down walls, windows, and the faces of statues that stood as silent sentinels to a vanished world. By a square, she paused before a statue of Lenin, its stern visage staring into the distance, perhaps still guarding the ideals of a past that had drifted beyond reach. Moss crept along the pedestal, entwining history with nature's quiet reclaiming. The raindrops gathered in the hollow of the statue's eyes, forming silent tears that glistened before they fell. Anya felt a curious warmth in this solemn companionship, a sense that in walking these forgotten paths, she gave voice to the voiceless, that in her quiet presence, the city remembered it had once been alive. And perhaps, in some way beyond the veil of comprehension, it remembered her too. Night descended in a soft hush, blanketing the city with shadows that caressed rather than consumed. Lights, faint and wavering, flickered in the depths of some buildings, a trick of the eye, or perhaps a lingering echo of lives once lived. Anya watched them, neither questioning nor fearing, merely accepting their gentle presence in the silent vigil of the night. At the heart of Chernobyl's stillness, time itself seemed to hum with a softened rhythm, a slow, dreamlike pulse that lulled Anya's thoughts into a gentle reverie. And as the wind stirred softly through the trees, carrying with it whispers of songs long faded, she knew she would return to this place, night after night, drawn by a thread of quiet wonder woven into the very soul of the city. The city, for the dead, was never truly silent. It spoke in sighs, in echoes, in the soft patter of rain and the creak of forgotten swings. And Anya, the silent wanderer, became both listener and witness, her heart beating in quiet harmony with the slumbering remnants of Chernobyl's endless, haunting dream. In the 11th chapter of Anya's silent sojourn, the city unfolded before her like the pages of a forgotten diary, each step tracing a sentence written in the ink of sorrow and time. The dawn arrived, not with brilliance but with a muted glow that seeped gently into the grey folds of the sky, casting a soft silver hue over the hushed landscape of Chernobyl. Anya had awakened beneath the skeletal arms of a withered tree, her body wrapped in the calm embrace of the early morning mist. The air was cool, carrying with it a faint scent of damp earth and old stone, a fragrance that whispered of ancient soil reclaiming its dominion over the creations of man. She rose slowly, allowing the quiet of the morning to settle upon her like a soft mantle. Around her, the city remained shrouded in that strange, otherworldly stillness, a place untethered from the relentless march of the living world. The silence was not oppressive, but gentle, like the hush of a chapel before a prayer, holding within it the soft echoes of unseen memories. Her steps led her deeper into the heart of the city, where the buildings grew more ornate, remnants of a time when this place had aspired to be more than a mere industrial outpost. An old cinema stood before her, its facade a crumbling testament to the dreams once projected within its walls. The word Prometei still adorned its entrance, though half the letters hung askew or lay in fragments upon the ground. Anya approached, pushing open the door with a soft push of her hand. Inside, the scent of aged velvet and dust wrapped around her like a faded cloak. Rows of seats stretched before her, their upholstery frayed and moth-eaten. The stage, framed by heavy moth-eaten curtains, stood empty, though a faint shimmer of light pooled upon its boards, as though awaiting an unseen performance. She sat quietly in the first row, hands folded in her lap, and gazed at the stage. The echoes of applause, laughter, and whispered conversations seemed to linger just beyond the edge of hearing. Perhaps it was the power of suggestion, or perhaps the city whispered in its subtle way once more. Anya closed her eyes, letting the silent performance unfold within her mind, a play of shadows and light performed by the ghosts of memory. When she opened them again, she found herself smiling softly, not from joy, but from a deep, tender sorrow, a bittersweet ache for things once loved and now forgotten. She rose, her footsteps echoing faintly upon the worn floorboards as she made her way toward the stage. The velvet curtain parted slightly at her touch, revealing the simple emptiness behind, a place where dreams had once danced upon painted backdrops now dulled by time. Beyond the cinema, Anya wandered into a residential quarter where the homes, though modest, spoke of once vibrant lives. Each window, dark and hollow, reflected fragments of the sky, like the mirrored eyes of silent witnesses. She paused before a house whose gate hung slightly ajar. The small garden beyond had been overtaken by wildflowers and creeping vines, nature's delicate reclamation of what man had left behind. The door opened with a soft groan beneath her hand, revealing a world frozen in gentle disarray. Inside, a kitchen table stood set with mismatched dishes, as if awaiting a family supper that never came. A child's toy, a simple wooden horse, rested upon the floor, its paint chipped but its form intact. Anya knelt beside it, her fingers brushing its surface. The air within the home felt warm, not with heat, but with the tender echoes of life that once thrived within these walls. She moved softly from room to room, each space holding its quiet testament. A dress hung upon a door, its fabric thin with age, swaying gently in the draught. A journal, its pages yellowed and ink faded, lay upon a bedside table. She opened it delicately, reading fragments of entries that spoke of simple hopes, of a husband's return from work, of a child's first steps, of a birthday planned for a mother long since gone. Anya closed the book softly and placed it back upon the table. This home, like so many others, was not merely abandoned, it was paused, like a breath held in the chest of a city that waited for the return of hearts now stilled. As the day stretched onward, the soft drizzle returned, veiling the city in a delicate curtain of rain. Anya stood beneath the awning of a small bakery, its sign swaying gently in the moist breeze. The scent of old flour and sweetness lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the soft hiss of rain upon stone. She wondered, in that quiet moment, of the hands that had once kneaded dough upon the worn wooden counters, of the laughter that might have filled this tiny shop when warm bread was pulled from the oven. The past felt close here, closer than breath, nearer than the rain's gentle touch upon her skin. By evening, she found herself upon the threshold of a narrow alleyway, its cobbled path leading to an old church, its spire rising softly against the muted sky. The bells, long silenced, hung still in their tower, yet Anya felt their presence, as though their chimes echoed quietly within the chambers of her heart. She entered the church with slow, reverent steps. Inside, the air was cool, and the scent of old incense lingered faintly, mingling with the gentle musk of aged wood. Candles, though long extinguished, stood upon iron holders, silent sentinels in the shadowed sanctuary. Anya knelt before the altar, her hands folded softly in her lap. She did not pray, for there was no plea upon her lips. Instead, she simply listened, to the hush of the rain upon the roof, to the soft creak of timbers shifting with time, to the silent hum of a world that had not yet let go of its living breath. And in that quiet, sacred stillness, Anya felt a deep, abiding peace settle gently within her. A peace born not of forgetting, but of quiet remembrance. Chernobyl, the city for the dead, remained a place where life's soft echoes still lingered, held gently in the arms of the silent, waiting earth. With nightfall, she rose once more, stepping into the cool embrace of the evening, her heart carrying the tender weight of all she had seen, of all she had silently honored in her gentle passage through this haunted, dreaming city. Night fell with a soft, enveloping hush over the sleeping city, casting Chernobyl in shades of muted silver and charcoal. The air grew dense with a quiet, almost sacred reverence, as though the earth itself held its breath beneath the weight of unseen memories. Anya walked through the deserted streets beneath a pale moon that hung low and solemn in the sky. Its light spilled gently upon the cracked pavements and weathered facades, softening their decay and lending them an ethereal beauty. In this silent world, every shadow seemed alive, not menacing but watchful, guardians of secrets woven into the bones of the city. She passed by a crumbling factory whose chimneys reached toward the heavens like the skeletal fingers of some fallen titan. Rust stained its walls in streaks of crimson and ochre, and broken windows glimmered faintly like shards of forgotten stars. Yet even here, amid the rust and ruin, Anya felt a strange tenderness, a silent acknowledgement of the labor that once filled these halls, of hands that crafted and built, now faded into the quiet breath of the night. Inside, the vast assembly floor stretched out before her, a cathedral of industry now emptied of its congregation. Machines, long silent, stood in solemn rows, their gears frozen in mid-motion, as though the heartbeat of human endeavor had merely paused for a moment's breath. Dust lay thick upon the floor, yet even in its soft mantle, the outlines of footprints remained. ghostly echoes of those who had once walked these paths with purpose and resolve. Anya moved among the silent machines with a reverent hush, her fingers trailing lightly over cool metal and worn levers. Here, men and women had once shaped the bones of their future, believing in a world that seemed unshakable, a world that vanished with a silent, invisible breath carried on the wind. She closed her eyes and could almost hear their voices, the steady murmur of labor, the clang of tools, the laughter shared in moments stolen between shifts. As she emerged once more into the open air, a soft wind stirred, carrying with it the faintest strains of music, fragile and distant, like the fading notes of a song played on a music box. Anya followed the sound, her heart gently stirred by its melancholic beauty. It led her to a narrow courtyard enclosed by high, crumbling walls where a single gramophone sat upon a stone pedestal. The record spun slowly, its melody soft and haunting, a lullaby of a bygone era. The sound crackled and wavered, but within its gentle strains lay a sweetness untouched by time. Anya sat upon a low stone bench, her eyes closing as the notes wrapped around her like a soft shawl. She did not wonder who had placed it there, nor how it continued to play. Some questions, she felt, were better left to the quiet magic of the night. The music sang of love left unsaid, of dreams paused in mid-bloom, of hearts that whispered their stories into the fabric of this silent city. Anya let herself drift with it, her mind painting visions of dancers spinning beneath lantern-lit streets, of lovers sharing secrets in shadowed corners, of children laughing beneath golden afternoon skies. When the last note faded into the hush of the night, Anya opened her eyes and smiled softly, a tender, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. The city, in its strange, gentle way, had sung to her, and she had listened with all the quiet grace her heart could hold. She rose and wandered deeper into the maze of Chernobyl's slumbering heart. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more intimate, small shops, bakeries, cobblers' stalls, their signs faded but still legible, each whispering fragments of the lives that had once thrived within. She paused before a tailor's shop, its window display frozen in time. A mannequin draped in a half-finished dress, pins still poised upon its seams. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of fabric and chalk. Anya stepped softly, her hands brushing over bolts of cloth now dulled and brittle with age. A sketchbook lay open upon a counter, its pages filled with flowing lines and elegant designs. Dreams of beauty and craft never brought to life. She traced the outline of a gown with a fingertip, her heart aching softly for the artist who had drawn it, unaware that their work would remain forever unfinished. The moon had risen higher now, casting its pale light in silver pools upon the ground. Anya wandered on until she reached a narrow footbridge arching over a small canal. The water below shimmered with the moon's reflection, rippling gently with the soft whisper of the night's breeze. She stood upon the bridge, hands resting lightly upon its iron rail, gazing into the quiet depths below. For a long moment, time seemed to fold around her in a soft, embracing silence. The world beyond Chernobyl felt distant, as though it belonged to another lifetime. Here, in this hush between past and present, Anya felt herself drift, part of the city's silent dream, a thread woven gently into its fabric of memory and loss. Beneath the soft glow of the moon, she whispered into the stillness, a simple murmur carried away by the wind. "I remember." And in that whisper, Anya felt the city stir gently around her, not with sound or motion, but with a quiet understanding, as though, for a fleeting moment, the heart of Chernobyl acknowledged her presence and folded her into its endless, silent embrace. The night deepened, its hush growing softer, the air cooler, as Anya continued her slow passage through the sleeping streets. Every corner, every silent shop, every empty home seemed to breathe with a delicate, unseen life, a chorus of quiet stories woven into the silent tapestry of a city that had once lived and loved, now held forever in a gentle, undying dream. The 13th night in Chernobyl came wrapped in a hush even deeper than those before, as though the city itself were retreating further into the folds of its dreams. Fog crept in low across the ground, curling like pale fingers around the remnants of human habitation, softening the jagged silhouettes of shattered windows and rusting railings. The air was thick with the scent of moss and distant rainfall, an aroma both earthy and faintly metallic. Anya moved quietly through this veil, her breath visible in the chill of the evening. With each step, she felt as though she were walking not merely through space, but through layers of time, descending deeper into a story whispered long ago and scarcely remembered. Her path led her now to the edge of the city, where residential structures gave way to broader, more isolated institutions. Looming before her in the half-light was a vast building, an orphanage, by the look of its fading sign and childlike murals now cracked and weather-worn. The painted figures on the wall, a son, a girl with pigtails, a bear clutching a balloon, had long since lost their colour, their faces blurred by rain and time. The door hung slightly open, swaying on rusted hinges. Anya stepped through with careful reverence, greeted by a silence deeper than any she had yet encountered. The entrance hall was broad and empty, its tiled floor cold beneath her steps. Peeling wallpaper revealed the ghostly outlines of once cheerful patterns, stars, rabbits and flowers lost beneath the slow advance of decay. She entered a playroom, where tiny chairs and tables still stood in place. Toys, scattered across the floor, lay as they had been left, a ball beneath a shelf, a doll with one eye resting in a corner. A line of small shoes sat by the door, some toppled over, others still upright, waiting for the children who would never return to claim them. Anya knelt before a faded wooden rocking horse. She pushed it gently, and it creaked back and forth with a long, slow groan that echoed through the stillness like a lullaby sung to no one. A chalkboard at the far end of the room bore the remnants of a lesson half finished, the Cyrillic letters smudged and dusty. Beneath them, a child's name had been written in bold, uncertain strokes. Masha. A wave of tenderness swept over Anya, and she rose, wandering deeper into the building's heart. She passed rows of dormitories, their bunk beds draped in cobwebs and brittle sheets. Small drawings were pinned to the walls. Stick figures of families, bright suns, animals rendered in vibrant crayon strokes. Their colours faded, but still brave against the creeping dullness of age. In one room she found a collection of storybooks stacked upon a shelf. Their covers were soft and faded, the spines cracked from loving hands. She selected one and opened it. The pages whispered softly as she turned them. The tale inside was simple: a fox in a red scarf, a forest adventure, a happy return home. Her lips moved silently as she read, her voice a ghost of a ghost, threading itself into the hush of the room like a lullaby lost in time. As she closed the book, a breeze stirred through a broken window, fluttering the curtains like wings. The orphanage seemed to breathe, a long, slow exhale that stirred the dust and the dreams that lingered in the corners. Anya lingered there a while longer, her presence gentle and unintrusive, as though she hoped merely to listen and not awaken whatever memories still slept within those walls. Later, as the fog grew thicker and the moon disappeared behind its gauze, Anya found herself drawn toward a path behind the building, a narrow track that wound through an overgrown garden. Wildflowers bloomed there in quiet defiance, their delicate petals swaying softly in the mist. A swing set stood at the garden's edge, its metal frame rusted but still intact. One swing moved gently, though there was no breeze to stir it. She sat upon it, the chains groaning quietly as she rocked forward and back, her boots brushing the damp grass. The rhythm soothed her, not like sleep, but like memory, the kind of memory that drifts not from the mind but from the soul itself, stirred by places, sounds, and the weight of longing that needs no name. In that moment she felt not alone, but surrounded by presences unseen, not spectral, not frightening, but gently watchful. The orphans, perhaps, or the caretakers who had once soothed them to sleep, still lingering as echoes in the places they had once called home. The garden, the swing, the tiny shoes, all bore witness to lives small but full, precious and now preserved in this endless twilight. As she rose and walked away, she turned once to look back. The orphanage stood like a great ship docked in time, its windows glinting faintly in the moonlight that returned, just for a moment, through the parting fog. She made her way back into the city's quieter streets, where lampposts leaned like tired sentries, and ivy grew thick along the stone walls. A cat crossed her path, silent, thin and grey. It paused to look at her with eyes like twin lanterns before vanishing into the night, a flicker of motion swallowed by the mist. Anya continued walking, her heart carrying the softness of the orphanage with her, like a folded note kept close to the chest. She did not weep. though sorrow touched her gently. It was not the sorrow of despair, but of deep compassion, for the small, the forgotten, the tender moments that had once danced in the corners of Chernobyl's long silence. And as the clock somewhere unseen chimed the hour, its sound faint and warbled by distance, Anya stepped into the next chapter of her journey, where deeper shadows waited, and older stories lay curled like sleeping creatures, ready to be gently awakened by the quiet footsteps of one who chose to listen. The 14th night in Chernobyl unfolded beneath a sky heavy with drifting clouds, their bellies low and pale as though burdened by silent omens. Anya's path carried her beyond the quiet heart of the city and toward its outermost reaches, where nature had begun to weave itself more thickly into the abandoned landscape, draping ivy and moss over walls, curling roots through cracks in stone, and softening the hard lines of man's forgotten dominion. Here, the houses stood farther apart, some leaning under the slow weight of rot and time, others collapsing inward, their roofs caved like hollowed skulls. The air was sharp with the scent of damp wood and wild grass, a fragrance tinged faintly with the ghost of something metallic. An echo, perhaps, of the unseen presence that had once swept invisibly across this place and rendered it hollow. Anya's steps led her to a small farmhouse set back from the overgrown road. Unlike the solemn grandeur of the city's municipal buildings, this house bore a gentle, almost intimate character. Its wooden walls, though weathered and peeling, seemed to hold themselves together by the quiet will of memories still lingering within. The front door stood slightly ajar, its edge softened by layers of peeling paint. She pushed it open with a soft touch, the wood yielding beneath her fingers with a faint sigh. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, heavy with the sense of dried herbs, earth, and the faint musk of aged textiles. She entered a modest sitting room, its furnishings simple, yet carefully arranged as though awaiting the return of its inhabitants. A lace cloth lay draped across a small table, upon which rested a cup, cracked but whole, and a tin of tea left half opened. Beside it, a pair of reading glasses lay folded atop a book of folk tales, its pages marked with tiny slips of paper. Anya sat gently upon a worn armchair, its cushions softened by years of use. She traced her fingers over the book's cover, feeling the faint embossment of Cyrillic letters beneath her touch. She opened it slowly, the binding creaking faintly, and read a few lines aloud, not loudly, but in a soft, almost reverent whisper. The words spoke of old woods and gentle spirits, of heroes humble and kind, of simple wisdom wrapped in the cadence of age-old tales. A clock upon the mantel ticked softly in the quiet, its slow rhythm steady and calm. Anya leaned back, letting its gentle beat settle around her like a heart too slow to race, too old to hurry. The moment stretched, thin and delicate, as though even time itself had decided to sit quietly for a while within these walls. She wandered then into the kitchen, where jars of preserves still lined a dusty shelf, their colours muted but distinct beneath layers of cobweb. A loaf of bread, dry and crumbling, sat upon a cutting board, a knife resting beside it as though abandoned mid-task. An apron hung from a hook near the stove, swaying gently in a breeze that wasn't there. In the bedroom she found a bed neatly made, its quilt carefully folded. A photograph stood upon the nightstand, a man and a woman, their faces young and bright, standing before the very house in which Anya now lingered. They smiled in the picture, eyes squinting against the sun, hands entwined with a casual, unspoken affection. She touched the frame lightly, her thumb tracing the faint scratch along its edge. The simplicity of their joy stirred something deep within her, a quiet ache, soft and enduring. These were not grand stories of heroes or martyrs, but the gentle everyday threads of life woven with care and now left to drift silently in the folds of time. Anya left the house with a slow, deliberate step, closing the door softly behind her as though bidding farewell to unseen friends. The wind stirred as she stepped once more onto the overgrown path, carrying with it the faintest murmur of whispered voices, perhaps nothing more than the sound of leaves shifting, or perhaps the quiet gratitude of a place remembered. The road narrowed further as she walked on, leading her toward a field where wildflowers swayed beneath the heavy sky. Beyond it, an old barn stood, its roof partially collapsed, its walls leaning like a weary traveller. Anya entered without hesitation, stepping into a world woven from dust, shadows and soft light filtering through cracks in the wooden slats. Inside, tools hung from pegs upon the walls, scythes, hammers, saws, all rusted now, their sharp edges dulled by time's indifferent hand. In one corner, a cart rested upon its side, its wheel missing, its frame splintered but still stubbornly holding shape. The scent of hay lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the cool, damp earth beneath her feet. She moved slowly, touching the worn handles of tools, brushing her hand over the cart's wooden frame. In the loft above, old bales of straw sat piled beneath the fractured roof, silent sentinels of a labour now long past. Anya climbed the narrow ladder with soft, steady steps, her fingers trailing the rungs worn smooth by hands that had long since vanished. At the top, she sat among the straw, her eyes drawn to a narrow window that framed the open sky beyond. The clouds shifted slowly, the pale light casting soft patterns across the barn's interior. She sat quietly, her thoughts adrift in the hush of the place, feeling the heartbeat of a world that lingered just beneath the surface of silence. It was here, amidst the quiet embrace of the barn, that Anya felt most connected, not just to the echoes of lives once lived, but to the tender, enduring spirit of the place itself. The land, the home, the tools, all spoke not of tragedy alone, but of love, work, and the small, steady joys that defined the heart of a life once lived here. When at last she descended and stepped out into the open field, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and cool upon her skin. The wildflowers bowed gently beneath the touch of the rain, swaying in silent accord with the rhythm of the earth. Anya lifted her face to the sky, letting the raindrops mingle with the quiet peace that filled her heart. Here at the edges of a forgotten world, she found not sorrow alone, but a soft, enduring reverence, a silent hymn to the life that had been, and the quiet, steadfast memory that remained. The 15th night in Chernobyl arrived cloaked in a cool drizzle, the kind of soft, persistent rain that seemed less an interruption of the night and more a companion to its hush. Anya's footsteps pressed lightly into the softened earth as she followed a narrow path winding along the edge of the city, an old tram line now half swallowed by weeds and creeping moss. The tracks glistened faintly beneath the moon's pale reflection, stretching like silent veins through the overgrown heart of the land. With each step, she moved further from the clustered remnants of homes and markets, drawn instead toward a structure that stood apart, its silhouette stark against the low, drifting clouds. The cultural centre, Dom Kulturi, the great hall that had once pulsed with the laughter of audiences, the strains of orchestras, and the applause of countless hands. Now it loomed in stillness, its grand columns streaked with the soft scars of weather and time. Anya approached slowly, her hand grazing the cool stone of the entrance. A mural once vibrant adorned the outer wall, stylized figures of dancers, workers, musicians, frozen mid-motion, their faces serene, their colours now softened to the pale whispers of what they once had been. The heavy doors stood slightly ajar, inviting her into a world that had once held the heartbeats of a community drawn together by art, music, and shared dreams. Inside, the vast lobby stretched before her, its marble floor veiled in a fine film of dust that dulled its once shining surface. Grand staircases curved upward on either side, their banisters smooth beneath her touch. Posters lined the walls, faded announcements of performances, lectures, concerts, each a silent echo of voices now long gone. She wandered into the main hall, its ceiling high and arching, adorned with delicate plasterwork of stars and sweeping patterns that caught the soft gleam of the moonlight slipping through fractured skylights. Rows of red velvet seats faced a broad stage, their colour dulled by dust, their fabric threadbare in places, yet still holding the gentle dignity of their purpose. Anya walked the aisle with silent steps, feeling the soft give of the carpet beneath her feet. She paused at the stage's edge and looked upward, her eyes tracing the faded gilding of the proscenium arch. The heavy velvet curtain hung still, its tassels swaying gently in a current of air unseen. With quiet reverence, she climbed the stairs to the stage and stepped upon its boards once worn smooth by countless footsteps, now creaking softly beneath her weight. She stood at centre stage, gazing out into the empty hall. The rows upon rows of silent seats stretched before her like a sea of unseen faces. For a fleeting moment she imagined them filled, the gentle hum of anticipation, the warmth of shared presence, the soft intake of breath before a performance began. And then, as if summoned by the strength of her imagining, a single note drifted through the air. Soft, low, drawn from the strings of a cello, a sound so pure and haunting that it seemed to rise from the heart of the building itself. Anya turned slowly toward the wings, her heart steady, unstartled. The music swelled softly, a melody both sorrowful and serene, threading through the hall like a whispered memory. From the shadows a figure emerged, not a ghostly apparition, but a simple outline of a man seated upon a chair, his hands moving gently over the strings of a cello. His features remained shrouded in the dim light, his form more suggestion than presence. Yet the music he played filled the vast hall with a gentle, aching beauty that stirred something deep within Anya's heart. She did not speak. She did not move. Instead, she let the music wash over her in soft waves, each note a delicate echo of longing, remembrance, and quiet grace. The cello sang of things beyond words, of love and loss, of the enduring ache of memories held close, of the bittersweet beauty of a world that had once been so alive. And then, as softly as it begun, the music faded. The figure bowed his head, hands resting gently upon the cello's frame. For a moment, the hall held its breath, and then the shadows deepened, folding gently over the stage once more. Anya stood alone, the last strains of the melody lingering within her chest like the fading warmth of a soft embrace. She stepped down from the stage, her movements slow and reverent, carrying within her the gift of that silent performance, a reminder that even in silence, beauty endured, waiting for hearts willing to listen. As she wandered back into the lobby, her hand brushed over a grand piano resting in a corner, its keys exposed beneath a film of fine dust. She touched a single key, and a soft note sang out, a quiet, lingering sound that hung in the air before fading into the vastness of the room. She smiled gently and left the building, stepping once more into the rain-washed streets. The world outside felt softened by the music she had heard, as though every drop of rain, every whispering leaf, every silent stone carried within it a thread of that quiet, haunting melody. The cultural centre stood behind her, a silent guardian of memories and dreams, its heart still gently beating beneath the layers of time and stillness. And Anya, the quiet wanderer, moved onward beneath the soft rain, her soul richer for the unseen concert, her heart attuned more than ever to the silent songs whispered by the slumbering city. The 16th night descended upon Chernobyl, with a hush so profound it seemed the very air had forgotten how to stir. The rain of the previous night had left behind a glistening sheen upon the streets and rooftops, a soft mirror for the pale glow of a waning moon that now drifted quietly across a sky washed in muted greys. Anya's path curved gently toward the Pripyat River, its slow, dark waters winding past the city like a silent witness. The embankment, once a place of laughter and idle strolls, lay hushed beneath a canopy of mist. Trees leaned over the water, their branches trailing like languid fingers upon the gentle ripples, and the faint scent of damp earth mingled with the cool breath of the river. She moved along the promenade, her boots making no sound upon the soft, moss-covered stone. The remains of benches lined the way, some whole, some splintered by time, each bearing the silent marks of hands that had once carved initials into their wooden arms or leaned against them in moments of quiet reflection. A rusting bicycle leaned against a lamppost, its tires long deflated, its frame entwined with creeping vines. Anya paused, resting her hand lightly upon its worn handlebars, feeling the faint texture of rust and damp metal beneath her fingers. It seemed less an object now, and more a monument. An artifact of a life paused mid-motion, left behind in a world that moved quietly on without it. The river whispered softly beside her, its surface reflecting faint glimmers of light that danced upon its gentle waves. Anya stood at the water's edge, watching as the current carried with it tiny fragments of leaves, twigs, and the lingering memories of a city that had surrendered itself to stillness. Farther along the bank, she came upon a small pier, its wooden planks weathered and worn, some cracked, some missing entirely. Yet it stretched resolutely into the water, a silent finger pointing toward a horizon veiled in soft mist. She walked its length with careful steps, each board giving a soft sigh beneath her weight, each echo swallowed gently by the hush of the river. At the pier's end stood a small boat, half submerged, its hull cradled gently by the water. The paint peeled in soft curls, and within its hollow lay a tangle of leaves and rainwater, a cradle for the quiet passage of time. Anya crouched beside it, running her hand along its rim, tracing the faint lines carved by a forgotten owner. A name, perhaps, now smoothed by the years. She sat there for a long while, her gaze fixed upon the still water, her thoughts adrift upon its slow, meandering course. The river felt alive, not in motion alone, but in memory, a great, quiet presence carrying the whispered echoes of the lives that had once leaned over its edge, casting stones, sharing secrets, watching the sunset fall upon its silent embrace. The fog thickened as night deepened, wrapping the river and its banks in a soft, shifting shroud. Shapes blurred, edges softened, and the world seemed to retreat gently into itself. Yet Anya felt no fear in this enveloping hush, only a quiet, profound sense of belonging, as though the city had folded her gently into its endless dreaming arms. Rising, she left the pier and continued along the water's edge, her steps slow, her breath mingling with the soft exhalations of mist rising from the river's skin. A gentle melody began to hum within her, born not of memory but of the soft rhythm of the world around her, a song of water, of wind, of silent, unseen hearts still beating within the hushed embrace of Chernobyl. Ahead, a lone ferry sat moored to the bank, its metal hull kissed softly by the river's slow lap. The name upon its side had faded almost to invisibility, and its decks lay silent beneath a scattering of fallen leaves. Anya climbed aboard, her steps light upon the damp wood. The ferry rocked gently beneath her, as though acknowledging her presence with a soft, careful sigh. She wandered its decks, hands brushing over rusting railings, eyes tracing the outlines of benches and lanterns, the places where voices had once filled the air with laughter and song. The ferry had been a vessel of passage, between shores, between moments, between lives. Now it floated, still tethered, a quiet sentinel watching over the river's silent course. At the bow, she stood with arms resting upon the rail, gazing out across the soft, shifting mist. The water moved with a grace so slow it seemed not to move at all, a living mirror reflecting a world softened by quiet. For a long, hushed moment, Anya closed her eyes and listened, not for sounds, but for presence, for the heartbeat of a city that spoke not in words, but in the soft language of things left unsaid. When she opened them once more, the first rays of dawn traced pale fingers upon the horizon, brushing the clouds with hues of muted gold and gentle grey. The river caught the light, casting soft reflections that shimmered like faint memories upon its surface. Anya smiled, a quiet, wistful curve of her lips, and stepped lightly from the ferry, returning once more to the waiting arms of the silent city. Her journey continued along a path softened by dawn's tender light, each step a quiet echo in the living dream that was Chernobyl. And as the sun lifted its pale crown above the misty veil, the city stirred gently in response, its heart beating softly in time with the silent steps of the lone wanderer who walked its sleeping streets. The 17th night unfolded beneath a sky the colour of tarnished silver, where clouds drifted slowly like the silent passage of ancient ships upon a vast and hushed sea. Anya walked in quiet contemplation, her steps carrying her inward once again, toward the place where the heart of Chernobyl's silent sorrow beat the strongest. She came upon the amusement park. It stood in the city's centre like a relic of an unfinished dream, a place meant for joy and laughter, now draped in the quiet reverence of abandonment. The great Ferris wheel loomed above her, its frame outlined against the fading sky, a circle of unmoving grace. Rust streaked its yellow supports, and the passenger cars, bright with peeling paint, hung suspended in time, cradling the soft weight of endless silence. Anya approached with slow steps, her hand trailing over the low rail that bordered the ride's platform. She imagined it once alive with the chatter of voices, the music of carnival tunes drifting through the air, the soft creak of the wheel turning lazily under a summer sky. Now, the wind whispered softly through its skeletal frame, a sound as delicate as a fading lullaby. She touched one of the passenger cars, its surface cool and rough beneath her fingertips. It swayed gently at her touch, the motion slow, a muted echo of the vibrant life it once held. The soft creak of its chains mingled with the hush of the evening air, a sound that stirred something deep within her, a quiet ache for the laughter that would never again rise here. Beyond the Ferris wheel, the bumper cars lay silent beneath a canopy half collapsed. The small cars sat in frozen disarray, some turned on their sides, others gathered in gentle clusters as though caught in mid-game. Anya stepped lightly among them, her reflection rippling faintly in the cracked mirrors overhead. The floor bore the faint scuffs of countless footsteps, marks left behind by lives now vanished into the hush of the city. She imagined children's voices, the gleeful shouts of friends in playful collision, the music of joy ringing bright beneath the canopy. And now there was only the soft breath of the wind, the gentle groan of the structure settling beneath the slow weight of time. Anya lingered beside a car painted in faded shades of blue, a white star emblazoned upon its hood. She brushed her hand along its edge, the touch tender, almost affectionate. In this place meant for laughter, sorrow felt deeper, not heavy but poignant, a soft thread that tied the living heart of joy to the quiet echoes of loss. She moved on to the shooting gallery, its painted targets weathered and peeling, the colours bleached by sun and rain. Stuffed animals hung upon the back wall, their fur dulled, their eyes glassy and distant, the prizes no one ever claimed. Anya reached out and took a small bear from its hook. Its seams frayed at the edges, and one button eye was missing, but it remained soft beneath her hands. She held it gently, her heart folding softly around the silent memory of the child who had perhaps dreamed of winning it. For a moment she pressed it lightly to her chest, a quiet, wordless gesture of remembrance. Then, with care, she set it back upon its hook, letting it rest where it had waited so patiently through the silent years. As dusk deepened, she wandered to the small kiosk at the edge of the park, a place once bright with sweets and balloons, now a hushed hollow. The counter stood bare, its glass cases cracked. A register, silent and dust-covered, rested upon the surface. Behind it, shelves held the faded outlines of wrappers and forgotten toys. Anya stood quietly for a time, letting the hush of the amusement park settle into her bones. It felt less like a ruin and more like a dream paused in mid-motion, a fragment of a song that hung forever in its last lingering note. The wind stirred softly, lifting a scrap of coloured ribbon that fluttered from a tree branch. She watched it dance in the evening air, its colours dim but still bravely clinging to life. Above, the sky darkened into a deep indigo, and stars blinked into quiet existence, scattered like tiny embers across the vastness. The Ferris wheel cast a shadow long and slender against the open ground, a silent sentinel watching over the slumbering park. Anya sat upon a bench, its paint peeling beneath the soft hush of night, and let the quiet wrap around her like a familiar gentle cloak. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, to the faint hum of wind through the iron frames, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant echo of laughter that lingered beyond the grasp of time. In that silent communion, the amusement park spoke to her, not in words, but in the soft, aching resonance of remembrance. A place built for joy, now resting in quiet vigil, holding within its silent spaces the echo of every smile, every shout, every song that had once risen beneath its sky. When she rose at last, the night had deepened into a soft, velvety darkness. She walked once more beneath the arch of the Ferris wheel, her shadow mingling with its silent lines. And as she left the quiet heart of the amusement park behind, she carried with her the gentle memory of a dream that never truly faded, but remained, soft, enduring, and forever waiting in the hush of Chernobyl's endless, dreaming night. The 18th night unfolded with a sky heavy and low, clouds drifting like soft veils across the face of the moon. The city of Chernobyl lay wrapped in a deep velvet quiet, its breath slow and measured, as though the earth itself whispered lullabies to a world asleep beneath the shroud of memory. Anya found herself walking a different path, a road once bustling with commerce and trade, now lined with the skeletal remains of shops and market stalls. The avenue stretched wide and silent, its cobblestones slick with the lingering sheen of past rain, reflecting the pale glow of distant street lamps that no longer burned. She moved with soft steps past the storefronts, their windows smudged with the delicate fingerprints of time. Behind the glass, mannequins stood in faded garments, their once vivid colours now muted into quiet pastels by years of sun and dust. Some stood upright in elegant stillness. Others had fallen, their limbs resting in strange, human-like repose upon the floor. Anya paused before a tailor's boutique, its door slightly ajar. The sign above the entrance bore a name worn smooth by the passage of seasons, its letters faint but dignified. She stepped inside, greeted by the soft scent of old fabric and varnished wood. The room held the quiet dignity of a craftsman's pride. Bolts of cloth neatly arranged, a tape measure draped over the arm of a chair, scissors resting open upon a cutting table. On the wall, framed sketches of dresses and suits spoke of dreams once measured and stitched into being. Anya touched a length of lace with the tips of her fingers. It felt fragile yet resilient, its patterns intricate, like the memory of a song woven into thread. She wondered about the hands that had worked here. Steady, careful, practiced hands shaping fabric into beauty for a community that once walked these streets alive with chatter and purpose. Her heart swelled with a gentle ache as she moved to the back room, where a sewing machine rested by a window cracked with age. A dress hung upon a mannequin, a piece half finished, the hem pinned, a needle still threaded and poised within a fold. It was as though its maker had stepped away only moments before, the echoes of their labour still lingering in the air like a soft hum. She stood in quiet reflection, allowing herself to feel the weight of what had been left behind, not as a burden, but as a delicate thread that wove itself silently into her own story. The tailor's hands might be still, but their craft remained, whispering softly through the fabric and folds of the quiet shop. Leaving the boutique with a soft farewell in her heart, Anya wandered on, past a bookstore whose shelves still stood, their spines lined like quiet sentinels of knowledge and dreams. She stepped through its door, the bell above giving a soft, hollow chime as though stirred by memory. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and ink. Dust floated in soft motes through the shafts of moonlight that slanted across the wooden floorboards. Anya trailed her fingers along the rows of books, some titles still legible, their covers faded but intact. Tales of distant lands, poems of love and longing, textbooks filled with knowledge now frozen in a time no longer moving forward. She picked up a small leather-bound volume, a collection of letters written by a poet to his beloved. The ink, though faded, held a flowing elegance that spoke of passion and quiet devotion. She read a few lines, the words weaving softly around her heart like a murmured prayer. The world outside the bookstore remained silent, the night holding its breath. Anya sat upon a low stool beside a stack of forgotten novels and let the quiet envelop her. The shop was not merely abandoned, it was resting, like a story waiting for its reader, a song waiting for its listener. After some time, she replaced the book upon its shelf and stepped back into the street, where the mist had begun to drift gently once more. The market square lay ahead, a wide open space bordered by kiosks and small carts, their canopies sagging beneath the weight of time. Anya wandered among them, her hands brushing over wooden stalls where once voices had risen in friendly barter, where coins had exchanged hands, and where laughter had mingled with the clatter of goods. The faintest echoes of that life seemed to hum in the air, a delicate, persistent presence that refused to fade completely. She paused before a flower vendor's cart, its wheels leaning gently upon the softened earth. A few dried blooms remained within its wooden box, their petals delicate as paper, their colours whisper-thin. Anya picked one gently, a faded violet, and cradled it in her palm, marvelling at its fragile endurance. As she walked on, the night deepened around her, wrapping the market in a soft veil of memory and mist. The shops, the stalls, the empty streets, they spoke not of abandonment, but of a quiet waiting, a patient remembrance of lives once intertwined in the daily dance of community. Anya felt herself a part of that quiet now, not a stranger but a gentle guest, carrying within her the silent stories of all she had touched, all she had seen. The market, like the city itself, seemed to accept her with a hush of soft welcome, a recognition of shared solitude. And so she walked onward beneath the quiet sky, the soft pulse of Chernobyl's sleeping heart beating gently in time with her own. In every shadowed storefront, every silent cart, every whisper of breeze through the empty square, she felt the delicate hum of life remembered, and knew with a quiet certainty that the city's story was far from forgotten. The days that had stretched into weeks became months, and the slow decay of Chernobyl itself seemed to take on a rhythm, a steady, solemn breath of a place suspended between memory and oblivion. In this space, past the realm of ordinary time, Alexei found himself wandering deeper into the bones of the city, tracing its veins with the quiet reverence of a man who no longer searched for answers, but simply moved with the gentle current of his curiosity. The hospital stood at the edge of the zone, a structure rumoured to house the remnants of the first victims, the firemen and workers who had met the reactor's wrath on that cruel April morning. Its facade was split by cracks like veins of some ancient tree, its once white plaster now streaked in shades of rust and sorrow. Alexei felt the air thicken as he approached, not with fear, but with a deep, instinctual knowing, a sense that this was a place touched by sorrow deeper than the human heart could reckon. The lobby welcomed him with silence. Shattered glass glittered like frozen tears across the floor. An abandoned gurney stood askew in the hallway, its wheels locked by rust. Dust lay in soft drifts over everything, blurring the outlines of what once had been. A nurse's station, a collection of faded records scattered like forgotten leaves, and a single, child's shoe, its colour drained by time. Alexei moved with the reverence of a pilgrim. His boots made soft sounds upon the littered tiles, and the hush of his breath mingled with the steady hum of the wind that wove itself through broken windows and hollowed walls. In this quiet, he did not feel alone. The hospital held on to its echoes, of hurried footsteps, of whispered names, of a sob choked back by duty, and now they stirred around him like embers in the ash of time. He wandered into a room where faded curtains hung limp against the skeletal remains of iron-framed beds. Here the linens lay crumpled and untouched since the morning they had been abandoned. On one pillow an imprint remained, the faint hollow where a head had once rested. Alexei did not touch it. He only watched, letting his eyes rest upon that silent trace of a life paused in motion. Further along the corridor he found the radiology wing. The lead-line doors had been left ajar, their heavy forms arrested mid-motion by some unseen force. Inside, Alexei paused before a bank of old X-ray images, still clipped to a lightbox long since gone dark. The images showed fractured bones, twisted spines, the shadows of lungs. They spoke of human frailty, of the quiet war waged within the flesh even before the shadow of radiation had seeped into the marrow of this place. And yet, it was not horror that stirred in Alexei's chest. It was sorrow, a slow, aching sorrow that pressed gently against his heart. A sorrow for those who had walked these halls, who had fought battles both silent and unseen, and who had vanished beneath the weight of a disaster no hand could hold back. They had been healers, caretakers, brothers, mothers, strangers, and now they were stories, whispers woven into the walls. In a side room, he found a doctor's coat still hanging upon a peg. Its fabric was brittle with age, yellowed like parchment. Beneath it, a clipboard lay upon a chair, its paper curling at the edges, ink faded to the soft grey of remembered words. Alexei lifted it carefully, reading the neat Cyrillic script, an admission note, a name, a date. The date was April 26, 1986. He exhaled softly. This was the morning everything changed. This was the morning when lives had turned from routine to ruin. He imagined the doctor who had written it, perhaps standing right here, unaware of the invisible tide that crept through the walls, stealing health, stealing life. The realization pressed against his ribs, not in terror, but in a quiet, reverent awe of the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. The soft creak of the floorboards beneath his boots seemed a solemn music as Alexei moved deeper, stepping into a surgical theatre. The operating table stood beneath a cracked skylight, the soft fingers of sunlight brushing its cold surface. Instruments lay scattered upon a tray, a scalpel, forceps, a pair of scissors rusted shut. Dust softened their edges, and in this quiet they seemed like relics of a long-forgotten rite. He sat upon a nearby stool, letting the silence press gently around him. His eyes traced the walls, the ceiling, the way the light fell, and caught upon the lingering ghosts of this place. Alexei did not know how long he remained seated, but time seemed to fold gently over itself, wrapping him in the slow hum of the forgotten hospital. His breathing matched the rhythm of the quiet, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of the city itself. When he finally rose, the world felt softer, as if the veil between the past and the present had thinned, allowing him a glimpse beyond the edges of understanding. He left the surgical wing with a bow of his head, a silent farewell to those who had once walked here, their footsteps now merged with the whispers of the walls. Outside, the evening sun cast long amber shadows across the cracked pavement. The air felt cool against his face, carrying with it the faint scent of earth, metal, and something almost sweet, like the memory of a song long forgotten. Alexei looked back at the hospital, its silent facade gazing down upon him like a solemn sentinel. He wondered then if Chernobyl itself could feel, a strange, tender thought that took root in the soft earth of his mind. If the city carried memory, if it whispered its sorrow to those who dared listen. And standing there alone in the soft hush of twilight, Alexei thought he heard it. A faint, nearly imperceptible hum, like the echo of voices far beneath the ground. A soft chorus woven into the fabric of the air. He did not flinch. He only closed his eyes, allowing the hum to settle within him, a lullaby of sorrow and memory sung by a city for the dead. And in that moment Alexei knew he would return again and again until the whispers of Chernobyl became his own. Night draped itself over Chernobyl with a softness that belied the shadowed weight of its past. The sky, a deep indigo bruised with fading traces of crimson, stretched endlessly above the silent horizon. Alexei found himself wandering beyond the hospital grounds, his steps slow, guided by no more than the quiet pull of curiosity and the hush of the wind that whispered faintly among the skeletal remains of the city. The air had cooled, carrying with it the faintest scent of pine mingled with the metallic tang of decay, a fragrance unique to places long abandoned. The forest, known as the Red Forest, loomed to the west, a haunted stretch of land where the trees had once burned from the inside, their needles turned the color of rust by invisible hands of radiation. It stood now like a dark tapestry against the velvet sky, silent and unmoving as though holding its breath. But Alexei did not walk toward the trees. Instead, his path curved gently toward the outskirts of the city, where low apartment blocks sat crouched beneath the weight of years and silence. The buildings were uniform, grey monoliths softened by creeping ivy and the slow work of nature reclaiming its ground. Windows gaped like hollow eyes, staring vacantly across cracked courtyards where weeds pushed through ancient concrete. He stepped beneath an archway into a courtyard once vibrant with life. There had been laughter here once, children playing, neighbours exchanging quiet words over morning cigarettes, old men watching the days drift by with slow, knowing eyes. Now, it held only the rustle of leaves stirred by the restless wind and the soft, measured footfalls of a lone visitor. A carousel stood at the centre, its metal frame leaning slightly, horses frozen mid-prance, their paint peeled and faces cracked by decades of rain and frost. Alexei approached it slowly, his hand trailing along the cold metal of its edge. The silence around him felt almost sacred, like a chapel abandoned yet still echoing with forgotten hymns. He pushed gently against the carousel. It shuddered once, groaned softly, a long, low sigh, and began to turn slowly with the faintest creak of protest. The motion stirred the air, carrying with it a whisper of old laughter, as though some deep memory of joy lingered in the faded wood and tarnished brass. Alexei let it turn, watching as the painted horses circled, their hollow eyes catching the soft gleam of the rising moon. The carousel came to a stop on its own, settling back into stillness as if exhaling the last of its remembered past. Alexei felt a quiet ache in his chest, not of fear, nor sadness, but a deep, strange tenderness for a life he had never known, for moments lived and lost before his time. He stepped away, the echo of its slow turn still humming faintly in his ears. Nearby, an apartment block yawned open, its entrance door hanging from a single rusted hinge. He crossed the threshold into a stairwell choked with shadows and the lingering scent of damp concrete. The stairs spiraled upward, worn by countless footsteps, each carrying a story of its own. Alexei climbed in silence, his hand grazing the cool rail, tracing the faded lines of graffiti scrawled in youthful rebellion decades before. On the fourth floor, he stepped into a corridor where doors stood ajar, some barely clinging to their frames. He passed faded wallpaper, peeling in long strips like parchment. Dust hung in the air, a slow, swirling dance in the pale silver light spilling from a broken window at the corridor's end. He paused before an open door, the apartment beyond swallowed in half-light. Inside, the air held a stillness that seemed untouched by time. A small living room greeted him, a sofa sagging beneath a dust-covered throw, a wooden table with an overturned glass upon it, its rim chipped. Family photographs lined a shelf, their faces staring back in frozen smiles, edges curling beneath the slow hand of decay. Alexei stepped forward, his eyes drawn to a child's drawing pinned to the wall, a crude depiction of a house, a sun with radiant lines and 3 stick figures beneath. Above them, in uneven Cyrillic letters, a name, Papa, Mama, Me. The simplicity of it wrapped around his heart with a silent grip. Here once, a family had laughed, shared meals, dreamed of tomorrows never reached. He moved into the kitchen. Cups stood upon a table as though waiting for morning tea. A loaf of bread, reduced now to a brittle husk, sat beneath a cloth. The calendar on the wall marked April 1986, a red circle drawn around the 26th, a date now etched into history with quiet horror. Alexei touched it lightly with his fingers, as though the simple motion could draw forth echoes from the silent walls. As he stood there, a soft sound stirred the air, a faint tapping, delicate as a heartbeat. He turned slowly, eyes tracing the shadows until they rested upon a window where the breeze teased the edge of a lace curtain. The tapping came again, gentle, rhythmic. It was nothing more than the branch of a tree brushing against the glass, yet in this quiet, it felt almost like a hand reaching out from beyond. Alexei watched it for a long moment before stepping closer, his breath fogging faintly against the cool pane. The courtyard below stretched empty, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The carousel stood motionless, the shadows long and gentle beneath its silent frame. And beyond, the city of the dead slumbered on. Vast, solemn, untouched. He lingered there, allowing his gaze to drift over rooftops and silent streets, feeling the slow pull of night wrapping itself around him. Here, in this forgotten place, the world seemed softer, thinner, a veil upon which memory and the present wove themselves into a single silent thread. Alexei closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the soft, cool air. The walls around him seemed to hum faintly, not with menace, but with the soft chorus of lives once lived, of laughter once shared, of dreams now folded quietly into the fabric of time. He listened, not for voices, nor for the footsteps of the past, but for the gentle heartbeat of a city that refused to be forgotten. When he opened his eyes once more, the night had deepened, and the wind moved softly through the streets, like a lullaby sung by a city asleep beneath the weight of its own memory. The dawn arrived softly, not with the triumph of light, but as a slow, silvery seepage into the folds of night. The horizon remained muted, a pale wash of colour pressing against the deep hues of retreating darkness. Alexei descended the stairwell of the apartment block, each step falling with the measured grace of a man half lost within a dream. The air held a faint chill, that hush of early morning where the world hovers between waking and sleep. He stepped back into the courtyard, its familiar silence wrapping around him like a worn, gentle cloak. The carousel stood unchanged, a frozen sentinel watching over the playground of shadows. Alexei paused before it once more, letting his hand rest lightly upon the cool metal. The soft dew of the morning had gathered upon its surface, tiny jewels that caught the faint light and held it like whispered memories. Beyond the courtyard, the street stretched ahead, a ribbon of cracked asphalt bordered by empty buildings whose windows glowed faintly with the reflection of the morning sky. Alexei walked slowly, his boots making soft, hollow sounds against the pavement. The silence accompanied him, patient and unbroken, save for the occasional murmur of wind stirring through the skeletal remains of trees that lined the avenue. He moved toward a building that had drawn him with a quiet, steady pull since his arrival, a school or what remained of it. Its facade bore the marks of time and neglect, windows shattered, the main door standing ajar, its frame swallowed by ivy that clawed at the bricks with a slow, determined persistence. Above the entrance, the remnants of a painted sign still clung to the stone, the Cyrillic letters faded but recognizable. It was a primary school, once a place of laughter, of first lessons, of morning songs sung by small, eager voices. Alexei crossed the threshold, stepping into a world paused at the edge of innocence. The entrance hall was strewn with abandoned belongings, tiny shoes scattered across the floor, School bags hanging limply from broken hooks, papers curling upon the ground as though waiting for hands that would never return. The faint scent of chalk and damp wood lingered, mingled with the sharper edge of rust and decay. He wandered into a classroom where sunlight filtered through a fractured window, painting soft patterns upon the dust-draped desks. Each chair remained in place, as if a teacher's quiet command had stilled them forever. Open books lay upon desktops, their pages yellowed and words faded but still legible. A map of the Soviet Union stretched across one wall, its corners peeling, borders drawn with the confidence of a country that had believed in its own permanence. Alexei's hand brushed lightly over a child's exercise book. The handwriting within was small, earnest, the letters carefully shaped beneath a simple arithmetic problem. He read the sum slowly, his lips forming the silent numbers. The simplicity of it, the quiet normalcy of a child's schoolwork left unfinished, filled him with a gentle ache, a quiet sorrow for a morning that had begun like any other and ended like no other in history. The far corner of the room held a piano, its varnish cracked, keys dusted with the soft shroud of time. Alexei approached it, letting his fingers hover above the silent keys. With a soft, almost reverent touch, he pressed one down. The note rang out, faint, trembling, but pure. It echoed softly in the still air, a fragile voice in a sea of silence. He pressed another key, then another, letting a slow, tentative melody drift into the empty space. The music did not banish the stillness. It became part of it, a gentle weaving of sound into the tapestry of forgotten moments. Alexei played without thought, letting his fingers move in soft, uncertain patterns, notes falling like raindrops upon the dust. In that quiet communion between the living and the echoes of the past, the walls seemed to breathe gently, as though acknowledging his presence. When he finally lifted his hands, the air held onto the last trembling note for a heartbeat longer before allowing it to fade into the hush. Alexei exhaled softly, standing beside the piano with a quiet sense of having touched something far older and deeper than himself. He stepped into the hallway beyond, passing lockers left ajar, their contents spilling onto the floor in soft heaps. A single child's coat hung upon a hook, a small red garment now dulled to a soft brown. The sight of it caught at his heart in a way he could not explain. It hung there still, waiting, as though the child might return at any moment to shrug it on, oblivious to the decades that had passed in silent waiting. At the end of the hall, he found the gymnasium. The doors stood wide, opening into a cavernous space bathed in pale morning light. The basketball hoops remained, their nets long decayed, dangling in soft tatters. Wooden benches lined the walls, and a faded scoreboard clung stubbornly above. The floor bore the scuffs and marks of countless games, a record of youthful energy now hushed by the passage of silent years. Alexei stepped onto the court, his footfalls echoing gently against the high walls. He imagined the voices that had once filled this space, the cheers, the laughter, the sharp crack of a ball striking wood. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the imagined sound wash over him like the ghost of a distant memory. It was not a haunting, but a gentle presence, a reminder of life that had once danced in this now silent hall. As he moved to the center, his eyes caught upon something small and unexpected. A ball, scuffed, deflated, rested near the sideline, half hidden beneath a bench. Alexei approached it, crouching slowly. He lifted it with both hands, feeling the brittle leather beneath his fingers. The ball was light, fragile, but in his hands it felt almost warm, as though it still carried the echo of the last game played, the touch of the child who had last held it. He stood in silence, holding the ball against his chest, allowing the moment to settle deep within him. The gymnasium held no terror, no chill of forgotten sorrow. It was in this fragile dawn, a sacred space of memory, a vessel for laughter once shared, dreams once kindled, and lives that had pulsed with the vibrant beat of youth. When he finally left the school, the sun had risen fully, casting its soft golden glow upon the empty streets. Alexei walked slowly, the ball still in his hand, the soft hush of morning wrapping around him like a benediction. The city of the dead did not speak, but neither did it mourn. It simply was, a silent, enduring witness to the fragile, beautiful impermanence of life. The sun climbed gently over the horizon, casting a muted golden veil across the desolate streets of Chernobyl. The soft light seemed to soften the harsh lines of decay, bathing the abandoned city in a kind of mournful grace. Alexei walked with slow, measured steps, the worn leather ball cradled in his arms like a fragile relic of a vanished world. His path led him through narrow alleyways where grass pushed defiantly through cracked pavement, weaving tendrils of green against grey stone. As the morning unfolded in hushed stillness, he found himself wandering toward the heart of the city, the central square where once the pulse of life had beaten strong. The avenue widened, framed by crumbling administrative buildings, a cultural centre, and the skeletal remains of the hotel that had once welcomed visitors with bright lights and the hum of conversation. Now, all stood in silence, their facades softened by the slow hand of time and nature's quiet reclamation. A solitary statue stood at the centre of the square, an iron likeness of Lenin, his gaze cast resolutely toward some distant, unseen horizon. Rust streaked the statue's shoulders, ivy winding around its pedestal in soft embrace. Alexei paused before it, the ball resting at his feet. He gazed upward at the frozen expression, the determined poise of a figure that once symbolized unyielding power and progress. Now it stood as a monument not to might, but to memory, a silent witness to the quiet collapse of dreams forged in steel and fire. He sat upon the edge of the statue's stone base, letting the quiet settle around him. The square stretched empty in every direction, the vastness of its stillness wrapping around him like a soft, unspoken song. Above, the sky unfolded in soft hues of morning blue, clouds drifting lazily as if reluctant to disturb the peace below. The air carried the faintest hint of blooming wildflowers, a gentle, unexpected sweetness against the backdrop of ruin. Alexei closed his eyes for a long moment, listening to the breath of the wind as it stirred softly through the square. He imagined the voices that once filled this place, the footsteps of workers hurrying to factories, the laughter of children chasing each other in carefree delight, the quiet murmur of conversations beneath the spring sun. All of it now reduced to echoes woven into the silence that blanketed the city. When he opened his eyes, his gaze fell upon the cultural centre across the square. Its grand facade still bore the faint outlines of banners once hung with pride, the paint upon its columns flaking away like old parchment. Drawn by a quiet pull, Alexei rose and crossed the open expanse, his footsteps the only sound amid the soft morning hush. The doors of the centre stood ajar, inviting him into a realm where art and dreams had once taken flight. Inside, the air held a cooler stillness, touched by the scent of old wood and faded velvet. He moved through the grand foyer, its marble floors veined with cracks, chandeliers hanging like frozen stars from the high ceiling. The echoes of his footsteps rose and fell softly, a quiet companion to the silence that pressed gently against the walls. He found the theatre at the heart of the building, a grand hall where performances had once stirred the hearts of an eager audience. Rows of red velvet seats stretched before a stage framed in heavy curtains, their fabric moth-eaten and heavy with dust. The stage itself stood empty, bathed in a soft shaft of light that filtered through a high window. A single chair sat at its centre, facing out toward the silent audience that no longer remained. Alexei stepped forward, drawn by the quiet power of the place. He climbed the shallow steps to the stage, his hand brushing against the worn wood of the railing. The theatre did not feel abandoned. It felt paused, as though awaiting the return of voices, of music, of life that had slipped quietly away but never truly vanished. He stood beside the lone chair, gazing out at the rows of empty seats, imagining the faces that had once turned toward the stage with eyes wide in wonder. For a fleeting moment, he could almost hear it. A faint murmur of applause, the soft rise of a violin's first note, the gentle intake of breath before a spoken line. The echoes lingered not in sound, but in the air itself, woven into the very fabric of the silent hall. He sat upon the chair, the ball resting at his feet once more. His eyes traced the patterns of light and shadow upon the walls, the slow dance of dust motes suspended in the soft golden glow. Here in this silent heart of Chernobyl, he felt no fear, no sadness, only a deep, abiding peace, the peace of a place that had known both joy and sorrow, creation and loss, and now rested in the soft embrace of memory. As the minutes slipped by like soft whispers, Alexei reached for the ball at his feet. He lifted it gently, turning it over in his hands. The soft hum of the morning wind stirred beyond the open doors, carrying with it the scent of spring. He set the ball upon the stage, letting it rest there, a silent offering, a quiet gesture of remembrance for all that had been lost and all that still lingered. He rose, his movements slow, almost reverent. The theatre watched in silent witness as he stepped back, casting a final glance upon the simple, worn sphere that now sat at the centre of the stage. It seemed in that quiet moment a symbol of everything Chernobyl had become, a vessel of memory, a fragment of life, a whisper of stories untold. Alexei left the cultural centre as the sun climbed higher, its light spilling gently across the square. He walked slowly, the hush of the morning settling softly around him. Chernobyl remained unchanged, its streets empty, its buildings silent, but within its heart pulsed a quiet, enduring life. Not the life of bustling crowds or the clamour of industry, but the softer life of memory, of echoes, of a past gently refusing to be forgotten. As he stepped beyond the square, the city unfolded before him, silent, solemn, and alive in its own quiet way. Alexei walked with the dawn at his back and the soft hum of Chernobyl's memory wrapped gently around his heart. And though the city remained a place of shadows and silence, it welcomed him, not as a stranger, but as a listener, a witness, a quiet companion to the whispered tales of a city for the dead, where life still lingered softly amid the quiet ruins.